Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching first part of What If Naruto Woke Up from a Coma with an Unknown Power. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Team Kakashi was in the middle of their second real life, or death battle as shinobi at the bridge in Nami no Kuni, Land of Waves, while Sakura silently prayed for her teammates' success and frantically attempted to defend the bridge. Builder Tazuna, her teacher Hitaki Kakashi, the notorious copy ninja, was engaged in combat with Momochi Zabuza, the Kirigakure no Kijin, demon of the hidden mist. They were evenly matched after fighting in ninjutsu, taijutsu, and kenjutsu. But the battle between Uchiha Sasuke and Uzumaki Naruto and Haku, a member of Kirigakure's Yuki clan, was the most interesting. Both Sasuke and Naruto were afflicted with Senbon, and Haku's use of Hyuden, ice release, ninjutsu was too much for them to handle. They were moving more and more slowly, and Naruto was only partially conscious on the ground after being struck in several pressure points that would normally cause a shinobi to go catatonic. Fortunately, Naruto was extremely resistant to such attacks because he was both a Jinchuriki and an unaware descendant of the Uzumaki clan. Senbon was ready to launch at his enemies, and the fake Oinin, Hunter.Nin, was positioned inside his Makio Hyosho, demonic mirroring ice crystals. He observed the raven-haired one closely examining the mirrors, looking for any clue as to which one contained the original and the potential source of the next attack. "You move well," Haku said, a comment that both pleased and perplexed Sasuke due to the undertone of admiration in the voice. "Anyway," the Hyuden user went on, "I'll stop you this time." Haku considered this as he prepared more Senbon for another barrage. "Your body, reflexes, ability to react. You should already be at your limit." As he stood next to his comrade, he observed that the good-natured boy he had met a few days earlier in a clearing also rose. The orange-clad shinobi exclaimed, "He's coming," and the Yuki was left wondering how the blonde-haired boy had managed to pass the test needed to be promoted to Genin in Konoha. As both drew a kunai, the raven hissed softly, "Shush, calm down, concentrate and see through it, Usuratankachi." Naruto nodded, and both of them ignored their own battered, bloodied forms as they focused on the mirrors in anticipation of the next onslaught. The blonde was slightly nicked but otherwise uninjured, and both boys ducked to the right at the last second as Haku launched the Senbon. They witnessed it? Absolutely not. The foe. Oinin protested inwardly, startled and perplexed by the pair's response. Haku found himself staring into the Sharingan's eyes as the two raised their faces. Or more precisely, two sets of Sharingan, one with two Tomo between them and the other with a total of 3. Those eyes. The Sharingan can't be. Wondering how he could suddenly see so clearly, Naruto turned to face Sasuke and gasped. "Sasuke, you have eyes like Kakashi." "Sensei's," exclaimed Naruto, who was oblivious to the change except for the obvious improvement in his vision. When the blonde Uzumaki noticed his teammate smirking, the previously mentioned Uchiha stopped abruptly and gave it a second look. How? Uncertain of how to respond in this circumstance, Sasuke thought in disbelief. Their enemy's voice, which was beginning to really irritate him, abruptly jolted him out of his daze. The androgynous figure trailed off as he launched the Senbon. "Ah, so you two are also bearers of an advanced bloodline. No matter." And Naruto was caught by several others because he was momentarily confused by what the figure was saying. Meanwhile, Sasuke was able to avoid it. "How does the Sharingan belong to the Dobi? Don't tell me that he's related to you." Sasuke pondered. The last Uchiha found the concept strange. Not .so. Last, now, he thought absently. Knowing that Itachi is the only living family he could have after living alone for so long, it does not count. He will never again count. Would be the ones he fathered and reared himself, his mind insisted. And to be honest, at the moment, that was a little lower on his list of priorities. First, the bastard had to be killed. However, perhaps he wouldn't be as isolated as he initially believed. "What? 2 of us?" was what he meant. I'm not, Naruto asked bewilderedly as his body briefly collapsed from the harm he had just sustained. His eyes widened in fear as he heard the figure speak once more. He saw the figure dash out of the mirror across from him and hurl Senbon at him, probably hitting him in the eyes, which would instantly kill him. Sasuke was thinking the same thing, his Sharingan active. The masked figure shot at the blonde-haired Uchiha as he ran for Naruto as time seemed to slow down. In any case, Sasuke had just regained some semblance of family, and he would be damned if he lost it this easily. "Damn, get there in time, Naruto." Sasuke had no choice but to position himself between his teammate and the approaching attack as he ran to stop it. Kakashi stared at Zabuza in mild panic, holding a hand against his bleeding chest wound and panting. Sakura cried out in horror, "Kakashi! Sensei!" While Tazuna looked on in fear. Sakura was struck with panic and felt weak at the knees when she saw the figure of a slightly bloodied Zabuza just a few meters away. At least in her imagination, the face of the Kirigakure no Kijin was indeed living up to its name. Zabuza sarcastically remarked, "You were too late, Kakashi," which sent shivers down their spines. He smirked at the fear he instilled in his enemies and asked absently, "Did your desire to save these brats cloud your mind and make this mist thicken further?" With his voice fixed in a mocking drawl once more, Zabuza trailed off, "Even with that impressive eye, your ability to read my movements is dimming." With sadistic glee in his eyes, Zabuza remarked, "He. Let me enjoy this more, Kakashi. I want more fun as I return the favor, don't worry about yours brats." Haku has probably already killed them, observing Kakashi's jaw tighten beneath the man's mask. He shouted, "Oh, don't worry, Hitaki. I'm sending you to the same place they're going, so you'll get to apologize for being too weak to protect them." The three were left to stare in disbelief at the man's slightly manic eyes, which glowed with a sickening thirst for blood. Sakura unnecessarily highlighted herself in her rage at the man's remarks. It was, "No way," she cried. Her inner self yelled in agreement, "Sasuke-kun won't be defeated by a guy like that so easily. Same for Naruto," she went on. "Exactly," Kakashi concurred, startling Zabuza with his assurance. With a fixed gaze on the demon, the copy, Ninja went on, "I believe in their strength," challenging the man to disagree. Naruto's unshakable determination and drive, and Sasuke's heritage as the last of one of Konoha's most prominent clans. Zabuza tensed in surprise. Recalling the moment he saw the boy, he realized that sending Haku against the Raven might have been a fatal error. "You mean," he trailed off unsurely, a little concerned about the inferences his consciousness was drawing. He had heard about the lone survivor, of course. "Yes," Kakashi replied. "His name is Uchiha Sasuke, a genius ninja with the Kekkei Genkei of the Uchiha clan running through his veins." An offspring of that tragic clan, Zabuza stopped, suddenly recognizing what he ought to have noticed earlier. "Damn it, Kami." He made hand signals as he continued his thought process. "No wonder he's been progressing so quickly." Zabuza declared, "But that's the same case as Haku, then. There's never been a case of the Makio Hyosho failing, before disappearing again into the mist." The obvious was stated by Sakura when she exclaimed, "He disappeared again." Instead of rolling his eyes, Kakashi made a silent vow to his friend Kurenai that he would show him Team 7's only Kunoichi. Or perhaps Anko. Correct. Not now. Without even listening to his student's response, Kakashi commanded, "Sakura, stay here. It's about time I finished this fight," before leaping out into the mist. Through the fog, he caught a hazy glimpse of what he believed to be Zabuza's outline and raised his voice. Kakashi confidently declared, "You seem to think I survived in the shinobi system with naught but my Sharingan, Zabuza. However, I am afraid I'm a former, trained member of the Ansatsu Senjutsu Tokushu Butai, Special Assassination and Tactical Squad. 1. So I'll show you the ninja I used to be. Instead of copying jutsu, I'll show you my own." He made the decision that they would all need to complete some training after this mission was over. Naruto gazed in disbelief at the scene in front of him, which had a startling clarity as his familiar reality disintegrated. Sasuke was standing in front of him, slouched forward a little, panting heavily, his body enmeshed in senbon. Haku, who had taken the brunt of Sasuke's counterattack, was sprawled on the ground across from them, in agony. Sasuke said, "Tch, Dobi, you're always getting in the way," as he sagged back a little. Naruto caught his body as it fell, gaping in disbelief at the blood and the enormous quantity of sharp, pointy tools protruding from the last Uchiha's fallen form. "Why? Sasuke, you." Sasuke grinned feebly as Naruto stared at the raven, unable to comprehend how things had gotten to this stage. "What's with that face, you moron?" Sasuke asked. "Why would he come to my aid?" Naruto pondered. With a hoarse voice, Sasuke continued, "PFT. I hated you," as he felt his body succumbing to the poison and blood loss on the senbon. Naruto trailed off feebly, but until his rage flared. Naruto screamed, "Why? I never asked for your help, Teme." Despite feeling as though this would be permanently etched in his memory, he refused to accept it. "I don't know," Sasuke said falteringly, his face contorted in the height of agony. He went on, "My body moved on its own, while Naruto gaped in disbelief. He paused, then said, "Idiot." He coughed up blood and laughed weakly. "That man, my brother, I swore I wouldn't die until I killed him. But now, you're here. Avenge our clan, for me, please," he said. "You better attain your dream, Dobi." Then Uchiha Sasuke passed away. "He landed a heavy blow on me, and died for you without even flinching. He is truly strong, to protect his precious person in such a way," Haku said as he got up. Gazing at the Uchiha's body in his relative's arms, he concluded, "He is a shinobi that truly deserves respect. Is this the first time you have lost a close friend?" "This is the way of the shinobi," exclaimed Haku as he stepped back into the mirrors, ready to send another hail of senbon to break up the fight. "Shut up," Naruto uttered in a low voice, his arms still holding the lifeless Uchiha as he rose slowly, his body radiating intense murderous intent. He was plagued by a deep-seated sense of guilt and anguish. A dull ache slowly made its way into his eyes. He wanted nothing more than to scream as hatred boiled, spat, and bubbled. To inflict pain on his adversaries and the world. He was to blame for this. If only he had been stronger, better, or faster. Silently, he thought, "I hated you, too." A sharp, burning, blinding pain suddenly replaced the ache in his eyes, and he finally cried out in agony and fury. When an inhuman scream broke the silence and a strong sense of murderous intent permeated the space, Kakashi, Zabuza, Sakura, and Tsunade's focus shifted toward the ice dome. Sakura retreated a step, trembling in terror as Tsunade collapsed to the ground, barely avoiding soiled hands. Both Zabuza and Kakashi started to perspire and stare toward the conflict between their students. What is this? With memories of his attempt to overthrow the Yondaime Mizukage, Yagura, and the Sanbi Jinchuriki, Zabuza pondered. His thoughts were filled with pictures of the blonde boy with the whiskers and stories about the fabled Kyuubi. Wait, that child can't be. No, definitely not. Meanwhile, Kakashi was in a panic. There was no question as to whether this was what he believed it to be. Either the seal had broken entirely, or it was deteriorating. What might have caused Naruto to react in this way? As he and Zabuza hurried to the ice dome, their rivalry momentarily forgotten, he pondered. After a month-long nap, the Kyuubi opened its eyes within the Hake no Fuin Shiki. 8 trigrams ceiling style. Laughing darkly as it sensed that its host was extracting more chakra from the seal. As the host had absorbed its chakra from the seal the brat's father had placed prior to his passing, it had been keeping watch over the years. The Gaki was pitiful, and now the Biju could finally carry out its plan to increase the host's power and win its favor. This would put it one step closer to escaping the damned seal, since what it was going to do could damage it almost irreparably, and the Gaki couldn't stop it without the key to the seal. Even back then, changing Uzumaki seals was a delicate matter best handled by the Uzumaki themselves, who were the experts. Meanwhile, the mortal had to appear the part because, as much as the Biju hated to admit it, the ninjin was essentially its representation in the world. To the shinobi, the elemental nations, the Jinchuriki was, after all, the beast in human form, and the Kyuubi would be damned if this ninjin gave the impression that it was weak. The Kyuubi grinned a little as it collected the chakra from where it had previously been, attached to the boy's body like a repulsive stain that it had been unable to completely remove until now. Indeed, there was a chance that the surge might cause irreversible harm to the host's body, but the ninjin of that village would just remove the Biju and put him in a different vessel, restarting the process. And if not time, the Kyuubi had nothing. Even so, it was unlikely that any long-term damage would occur because the boy was a distant descendant of him, not that the Gaki could ever be comparable. The strongest Biju was just finishing the chakra surge when it felt a familiar kind of chakra that left a distinctive footprint that the Kyuubi had not felt in 12 years. Its eyes widened considerably as it realized what had happened outside the seal again and how much of a mistake it might have made. This is bad, the Biju thought. The blonde's head lifted, revealing the spinning Sharingan in his eyes, which gradually changed into a new form of Sharingan, and the foe, Oinin, watched in horror. Each Tomo, now fully matured, he remarked absently, extended in opposite directions, beginning at a sharp point that came from the center of the eye, where the pupil had remained black, and extending outward in black curves that formed a kind of brace, of which 3 were positioned around the eye at equal intervals. 2. The boy's body was suddenly covered in a very repulsive chakra that was leaking malice and bubbling red. The chakra then abruptly withdrew, and innumerable spear points appeared along the boy's upper body, pointing in all directions. What the devil? As the spear points all flew forward on chains, embedding themselves in everything around the blonde and impaling themselves throughout several points in Haku's body, his thoughts were momentarily silenced. With his red dot and black eyes, Naruto stared out at the mist as the mirrors broke and the chakra chains drew away before collapsing into unconsciousness. At age 5, Hitaki Kakashi received his diploma from the Konoha Shinobi Academy, and at age 6, he was elevated to the rank of Chunin. He was later demoted, a stain on his record that, even in the face of death, he would never acknowledge, and then promoted after serving under Namikaze Minato for a while. He became an Enbu captain shortly after becoming a Jonin at the age of 13. He would like to claim that because of the hard life he had led as a member of Konohagakure's elite, he had become immune to shock, bewilderment, and other such base emotions. But as it was, he could honestly say that he was completely shocked. And he would never publicly acknowledge that, never. Since Minato Sensei taught that it is best to prepare for the worst and hope for the best, he had instantly feared the worst when he sensed the abrupt increase in killing intent and chakra. As it was, he thought sadly of the night 12 years ago when he lost his last two loved ones, Kushina Sama, Minato Sensei, and instantly remembered the last time he had felt this specific chakra. He was ready to rush in, take Sasuke out, and leave, mission be damned. However, after he and Zabuza had emerged from outside the Makio Hyosho, demonic mirroring ice crystals, they both looked inside and saw Naruto's form standing over Sasuke's limp body with spear heads emerging from the boy's body. The world was abruptly informed of the passing of one of the last members of the Yuki clan by the sound of rattling chains and breaking mirrors. To top it off, death by impalement on flying chakra chains. How humiliating. For his part, Kakashi only needed instinct and a well-honed reflex to survive the unexpected barrage of sharp, pointy tools that his blonde-haired pupil threw at him. He remembered the last time he had seen the golden Kongo Fusa, adamantine ceiling chains, which were protruding from the location where the dome of ice had been, and his mind was reeling. They were a rare bloodline of the Uzumaki, awoken only once every few generations, and it was extremely uncommon to see two wielders in a single lifetime, according to Kushina Sama. Kakashi had a lot of questions running through his head. Was each generation now able to access the bloodline that had been evolving? Was the latent skill triggered by something in Minato Sensei's genes? Was Kushina Sama's incredible chakra the only reason she was able to unlock the ability? Was it merely a genetic accident? Or, possibly the most perplexing yet terrifying thought of all, is the Kyuubi responsible for this? Because of his life as the Kirigakure no Kijin, Momochi Zabuza was afraid of very few things. He could, in fact, count on one hand the things that genuinely frightened him, and even then, he would have a spare digit. Yagura. The child was insane, and to his dying day, Zabuza would insist that the little bastard was still a teenager, no matter what the Yondaime Mizukage said. Biju. Quite understandable, considering that he had engaged in combat with Yagura. In addition, he had seen the destruction that Jinchuriki and their Biju could cause on the battlefield. It reduced common shinobi to the level of children. Youngsters participating in the triad games. Alright, Sama. When Zabuza thought of that woman, he shuddered uncontrollably. He still had nightmares about the pride in her eyes after he massacred that entire graduating class. She was ranked above the Biju for a very good reason, to put it simply. At least he was aware of its source. Last but not least was the most dreadful person he had ever encountered. A woman whose very presence still makes Kiri.nin shudder. Even some parents told their kids stories about how the devil woman, who moved with unparalleled grace and stealth, would enter their homes and teach them the meaning of pain and fear if they didn't follow instructions and eat all of their vegetables. Kushina Uzumaki. Konoha no Kusari. Takiatsu, Chain Cyclone of the Leaf, is a more popular name. The epitome of the three things, swords, stealth, and seals, that made an Uzumaki lethal. He had already met her, in combat. Naturally, at that time, he was still a young boy, just starting his adolescence, and still far below the Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinen Shu, 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. They lost 2 members to that woman alone during the war, so it's not like their power helped them in the long run. Although she wasn't very good at ninjutsu, her fuinjutsu, kenjutsu, and stealth were almost unrivaled. As a masked person whose identity was mostly unknown, she personally led the battlefront between Kirigakure and Konohagakure during the Third Shinobi World War. They were a match made in heaven for Konoha, and it was generally accepted that if the two had ever had a child together, the child might very well have been the next Shinobi no Kami, god of shinobi. Her rumored lover, the man who later became Konoha's Yondaime Hokage, had spearheaded the attack against Kumo. He recalled the historic battle in Kirigakure, the day a woman in a mask with blood-red hair led Konoha's forces into battle in a decisive battle that marked the end of Kirigakure's participation in the Third Shinobi World War. The Battle of the Bloodied Shore, Akarikuho no Tatakai. When the Rokubi Jinchuriki was ordered to release the Biju she had restrained on the Konoha shinobi, the battle escalated. Uzumaki Kushina then used her solid chakra chains to restrain the Biju. On the battlefield, the Kusari Takeyatsu was renowned for her toughness and her unwavering determination to protect her homeland. Add in the fact that Kirigakure was a major contributor to the destruction of her clan's ancestral village and, well, a massacre occurred. There are no words to adequately describe it. Only by playing dead, hiding beneath a corpse, and later claiming to have been knocked unconscious, or risking the Sandame Mizukage's wrath, did Zabuza himself survive. The Mizukage had no choice but to offer Konohagakure their unconditional surrender, a halt to the war itself, and a few other concessions after losing the Sanbi in an earlier incident just months prior. In return, they received their Biju back and the two swords of the swordsman they had lost. Joy. Therefore, his survival instinct took precedence over all other considerations when he saw the Kongo Fusa. Worried about what had happened to Haku, he released his Kirigakure no Jutsu, hiding in mist technique, and leapt back at the last second to dodge. The blonde Kushina Spawn's slumped form emerged from the clearing mist, and Zabuza thought, what else could he be, with that infernal chakra? The Gaki's defeated Uchiha teammate was next to him. On the other side of them was the mangled, bloody body of Zabuza's breathing became labored. Haku. Kakashi's pinkette Genin screamed as Zabuza walked to the remnants of his former apprentice. In actuality, Haruno Sakura was protected. After she had gotten into the academy, in crowd, she had a peaceful upbringing free of significant family deaths, terrible arguments with her parents, and encounters with bullies. Her father retired from the shinobi trade and opened a shop after realizing that, at his current rate, he might very well become a career genin. Her mother was a chunin level kunoichi who worked in Konoha's cipher division. She genuinely preferred the civilian life and wasn't too concerned with a real career as a kunoichi. Unfortunately, she would lose her chance to meet Sasuke-kun if she didn't continue to be a kunoichi of Konohagakure. She was unable to have that. No, absolutely not. She was aware that she ought to have been more serious about her training. She couldn't bring herself to do anything more than obsess over her looks and attractiveness. She had vehemently objected to every suggestion from her parents to go train, eat more, or engage in healthier activities. Additionally, it had truly come back to haunt her. She was perplexed by the sound of chains rustling and what sounded suspiciously like glass breaking. How could anyone have done that? She tried to see the strange dome of ice that the strange figure wearing the mask had created earlier as soon as she noticed that the mist was gradually dissipating. The one that, without hesitation, Naruto had dashed into. Moron, TCH, she thought. Shanaru. That idiot is going to obstruct Sasuke-kun. Her inner self was furious. Sakura was about to shout with delight when she noticed that the ice thingy was gone, realizing that her love had defeated the fake Oinin. Unfortunately, it was not to be. No, she saw Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasu, Zabuza's subordinates, crumpled and covered in blood. Sakura let out a shriek. No, that isn't possible. Her mind roared, refusing to accept the reality of what she was seeing. It is merely a genjutsu. That's it. Just a. Her inner voice was blatantly quiet. Sakura's thoughts returned to the genjutsu lessons from the academy. She instantly ejected chakra from her body and yelled, "Kai! Release!" at the top of her lungs while raising her hands in a seal and oblivious to the forms of Kakashi and Zabuza approaching their respective students. Sakura was instantly perplexed as to why the genjutsu had not yet lifted, mentally bracing herself to see what was truly happening beneath the illusion. Unsure of how to handle this, she stammered out, but, until her thoughts returned to the genjutsu lessons and she realized her mistake. She recalled that lesson and knew what to do, taking a kunai out of her pouch and instantly stabbing it into the tip of her right index finger. High-level genjutsu sometimes require other stimuli to be introduced, in order for escape to be possible. Nothing took place. In a desperate attempt to demonstrate that everything she was witnessing was a genjutsu, Sakura tried the kunai on her wrist once more and drove it across the previously delicate skin. It's not real. It isn't authentic. It's not true. She would gladly repeat this mantra in her head until the day she died. She didn't even notice the flicker of grief in Zabuza's eyes or Kakashi's sigh of relief when he noticed a weak pulse in both Sasuke and Naruto's forms. She spent too much time attempting to disprove this. She was getting really desperate by the time she had cut her wrist multiple times with a kunai in a fruitless attempt to refute reality. She glanced up into their client's sorrowful eyes as she felt a hand encircle the wrist of her kunai wielding hand. Tsunade eventually realized that everything she was witnessing was not a genjutsu because the feelings that were dancing in her eyes, sadness, pity, and sympathy, were too much for her to bear. The emotions in those eyes were too strong for genjutsu to capture. And horror followed that realization. She screamed once more, louder this time, and perhaps, just possibly, she shed a few tears for both of her teammates. As Haruno Sakura screamed and stared at her bloodied wrist in grief, she made a vow to herself that she would get stronger to exact revenge on her teammates and never again let anyone down so severely. Gato and his thugs had anticipated any one of several possible outcomes when they got close to the bridge. The best possible outcome: the bridge builder, whose name they honestly forgot, was caught in the crossfire after the ninja all killed one another in a single, brutal battle. The worst situation? The bridge builder was unharmed, and all of the ninja were still alive and engaged in combat. If that were the case, they only needed to rush in, axes in hand, and massacre the idiots while they were still unwitting. Really, how powerful could a ninja be? The bridge builder and both adult shinobi were staring at the aforementioned bodies while a little girl with pink hair screamed like a banshee. This was the one thing that none of their numbers had anticipated: seeing a number of slouched, bloodied forms that might have been children. Additionally, that was precisely what was happening at the bridge. One of the more twisted of the thugs called out, "Oi, we got ourselves a screamer, lads," and his fellows either wolf whistled or smiled lustfully. But Gato raised a hand and they stopped what they were doing. As it was, this was more than enough noise to attract the shinobi's attention, and Gato moved forward to speak. Gato smiled and went to kick the corpse after recognizing the most bloodied of the three forms as belonging to Zabuza's subordinate. Zabuza caught his leg in the middle of his swing. Zabuza spoke as the slimy businessman stumbled and fell backwards. He put more pressure on his employer's ankle, thoroughly enjoying the way the sleazy little man swallowed nervously. "What, pray tell, are you doing here, Gato?" he asked in a sickly, sweet voice, or as sickly sweet as he could sound given that he usually spoke in a rather hoarse, grating drawl. One of the more foolish among the swarming morons exclaimed, "Hey, unhand the boss. After all, who would fight a shinobi with civilian-level abilities?" As he started running in the direction of Zabuza, he demanded. A man named Hitaki Kakashi killed him by kunai to the brain before he even reached Zabuza. The copy. Ninja asked his companion, "Truce?" in the quiet hope that the man had realized what was going on, had looked under the surface, and realized that he was going to be betrayed. Zabuza was about to respond when they were interrupted by a particularly muscular thug. "This isn't any of your business, Konoha.nin," the savage man yelled, seemingly unfazed by his comrades' passing. Kakashi didn't think any of these idiots even knew the name of the deceased. Apparently, this jerk was just as stupid as the one whose body was still lying between Gato's friends and the two shinobi. "We're just gonna double cross the guy and kill him. You can take your precious kitties and sod off," they said. "Shut up, you fools," Gato commanded, drenched in sweat and gazing up at the Kirigakure no Kijin's face with a great deal of fear. That was stopped by Zabuza, who swiftly and effectively pushed his kunai upwards and through the smaller man's jaw. The taller ninja threw much of his remaining chakra out of his body in waves as he stood fully upright again, Kabikirabocho leaning on his shoulder and glaring at the thugs, the face of a demon emerging behind him, further solidifying his nickname. Kakashi gave the thugs an eye smile as they all recoiled in terror. To the friends of the now deceased Gato, the silver-haired nin asked, his form looking as frightful as his companions, "I suppose it would be too much to ask you to simply leave?" Kakashi came to his own conclusion after none of the thugs offered a response. "Oh, that's a shame. Shall we get to it, then, Zabuza-san?" One of the few men who had ever survived a battle against the Yondaime Mizukage turned to smile at the copy ninja of Konoha. Then there was a slaughter. They had overlooked him. Indeed, that was the reason he was here. That is, to be disregarded. And it was painful. How painful, Kami. He was aware that he was disliked by the original. The other didn't even know he existed, and they wouldn't like him. He truly was them. The other was a fake, merely a flimsy front that concealed the true identity. He was created to safeguard the world and both of them, to keep everything safe from himself. He was certainly not unaware of the irony. But despite his resentment, which he could not control because he was a creature composed of only such vile, dark emotions, he carried out his assigned duties as directed. Naturally, not voluntarily. No, not voluntarily. But wow, their obstinacy produced him in order to conceal all of that negativity. Oh, and the negativity was so overwhelming. Taking charge of the life they led, the life he shielded them from. He had put in a lot of effort and helped them get through the difficult moments. Talking to the other person was all he wanted. Irony, again, he thought absently, wanting his existence to be recognized, but the other refused to succumb to the darkness, not even for a second. Why do you refuse to accept me? Acknowledge the demon of your own creation, his mind commanded. Instead of the original, he knew the one inside favored him. Perhaps the creature understood him? To be confined, against your will, in order to keep the world safe? Really, who knew? Then he sensed it. A breach in the defenses that the other had laboriously built for so long, until at last they gave birth to him. The other was shattering. For the first time in a long time, he was gaining access to his mind, which was filled with negative emotions. He also longed for the tactile experience of the real world. He would make the other person recognize him. Although he doubted it, he did run the risk of the other forgetting him and oppressing him once more. It would haunt the other. He might be accepted by the other. Perhaps, at last, they could unite once more and defend one another as one person, forever. He recalled that it was his responsibility to safeguard the original, and he would do it every time. Always. Without fail, or his name wasn't. Oh, he sensed the opening. It was there. He and the other combined at that precise moment, when the original's body was severely damaged by the internal forces, and his mind was already so shattered and confused. The Kyuubi smiled and chuckled darkly inside the Hake no Fuin Shiki. A self-satisfied smile that promised pain and retribution instead of a friendly one. At least one thing went exactly as planned. Naruto would probably describe his current state of affairs as drifting, if asked. Drifting does work. A complex network of vibrant scenes was flashing through his mind as the world continued to spin. It was odd that he remembered all of these experiences even though not all of them were his own because he could recognize them as memories. He was viewing all of these things from either his own perspective or two other people's perspectives. They burned themselves into his memory as they passed through his mind's eye, and a new scene emerged. His entire life felt like it was being rewritten, and his mind was racing and hurting. He hoped that the memories of the two others would give him some insight into what was happening to him, even though he was unable to understand why. One of them was a severe woman with deep black eyes and red hair who was totally devoted to her career and her family. She had lived a long life and had experienced more than her share of adversity. She favored wearing a formal white kimono with a dark green obi around her waist, and she frequently wore her hair in two buns at diagonal angles atop her head. She had a slim face and figure. She was an expert at a peculiar ninja fighting technique that involved symbols, and she even wore this gear to battle. Whatever that meant, the woman was a fuinjutsu master. Her name was Mito Uzumaki. The other was a young girl with the same violet-colored eyes and fiery red hair, but instead of being stern and mature, the former was boisterous, brash, and easily agitated. In any case, Naruto couldn't comprehend her noticeable insecurity regarding her appearance because he thought the two women's red hair was breathtakingly gorgeous. Like him, she also had a worrying addiction to ramen. He wondered absently how close the girl was to him because of the striking similarities between the two of them. She was Uzumaki Kushina, after all. Naruto started to piece together a few things as the memory flashes went by, even though it felt excruciatingly slow to him. For starters, the woman was dying and the girl had met her when she was very old. He had experienced that memory on the side of the older woman, and he sensed that she was deeply saddened and remorseful as she looked at the young child. Both of them were from Uzushiogakure, which is where the Uzumaki clan resides. Clan Uzumaki. Yes, when Naruto learned that small fact, he needed a moment. Naruto continued to observe the recollection from the elderly woman's point of view until he discovered something that completely stopped him. Ships. Boats for the Kyuubi. These were his antecedents. Beyond his astonishment and perplexity, Naruto dimly acknowledged that he had been ignorant of the meaning of predecessors up until this point. Huh, that's strange. Kakashi studiously ignored the glares the villagers threw at his ailing charge as he hurried Naruto to the hospital. Following the battle in Nami no Kuni, Land of Waves, Naruto had gone into a coma, experiencing high fever and sporadic convulsions. Kushina had previously informed Kakashi that the Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, arousal procedure was rarely gentle, but this was. Sakura and Sasuke had both shown an unprecedented amount of concern for their teammates' condition, which seemed appropriate, if shocking. However, in all honesty, it was fairly comprehensible. Although Kakashi wasn't a chakra sensor, he was able to sense the erratic changes that Naruto's chakra network was going through, and it's likely that the other two genin could too. The young Jinchuriki's reserves of chakra were increasing, if the levels of chakra he was expelling while unconscious were any guide. In fact, at a pretty astounding rate. More quickly than would be healthy. After the battle, Kakashi informed Tsunade that they had to return to Konoha right away, so they dropped everything they were doing. With the approval of their client, they had been expelled from the village. It had been all Kakashi could do not to just abandon his other genin and run straight to the village with all the speed he could muster, but regrettably, Naruto's condition had gotten worse when he was moved. In any case, they had traveled the distance in 2 days. They had managed to travel despite the blonde's convulsions and the fact that he had not yet come out of his coma. Other than a few worried questions about their teammate's condition, Sakura and Sasuke had mostly kept quiet during the journey. In particular, Sasuke had been more tenacious than usual, but given the situation, that made sense. If the copy.nin hadn't been distracted by his student's rapidly deteriorating health, he probably would have been far more interested in the situation. Sasuke had told Kakashi everything, including Sharingan. As soon as Kakashi entered Konoha Hospital, he went straight to the front desk. "I'm told that one of the gate guards called ahead and made you aware of the situation?" he asked. Kakashi had never been happier that Konoha's medics always put their patients' health first because he honestly doubted his ability to control himself if he had to deal with a bigoted, hateful villager at that moment. Rather than batting an eyelash at the identity of the injured shinobi, the receptionist simply nodded and told him to put the blonde on a nearby gurney right away. Immediately, the copy.nin was attacked by doctors who wanted answers from Kakashi regarding what had put his genin in such danger, whether his condition had gotten worse or better, and whether he had any theories about how this happened. Kakashi reluctantly acknowledged his worries that the Kyuubi is the mastermind behind this and provided a summary of how Naruto ended up in this state, omitting the appearance of the two Kekkei Genkai because the Hokage would undoubtedly classify such things. Since the head medic and Hokage were always ultimately responsible for Uzumaki Naruto's care, the other doctors did not question this even though they appeared to notice it. After all, they were shinobi first and foremost, even though they were medical professionals. Kakashi just sat down and waited for the Sandaime to arrive after he was given memories of his cage Bunshin, who was designed to deal with the gate guards and debrief the Hokage, dispersing after meeting the Hokage. A few minutes before, to Sakura's surprise, the sensei, Bunshin led her and Sasuke straight past the mission assignment office and to the Hokage's tower. It was because of the mission's higher ranking, Sakura realized as the Bunshin talked to the Hokage's secretary. When she left the village 2 weeks ago, she really did not expect to finish an A-ranked mission, but she was happy anyhow. Although she did not anticipate caring so much about Sasuke, Kun's wounds and Naruto's ongoing battle for survival, they managed to survive and accomplish a mission that was well beyond their capabilities, and Sakura could barely believe it. She felt so useless on that bridge, though, and she resolved never to feel that way again, not when it was preventable. She still felt the steel in her mind and the resolve set in her gut as she mentally prepared to demand more training from their sensei. Not when there was something she could do about it. She also believed Sasuke had come to the same conclusion based on the resolve in his eyes. As soon as she was led into the Hokage's office, Sakura stood up, bowed to the Hokage, and then looked up at the window that looked out over Konoha and the wall behind the elderly Sandaime. She suddenly remembered how close Naruto was to the Sandaime and how they had just apparently returned from a mission without him. "Report," the Hokage said in a serious and slightly wary tone. Following instructions, Kakashi quickly and concisely summarized the main points of their multiple encounters with Kirigakure Nukanen, omitting the majority of details that would probably be covered in the mission report. But he stopped when he reached the battle at the bridge in the ice. Using Shinobi's defeat. "Hokage Sama, I believe it may be best if my genin are not present for the rest of the briefing, as there are some extraneous circumstances involved." At last, Sakura broke protocol and turned away from the wall to gaze curiously at their sensei. Sasuke appeared somewhat embarrassed, but before he could say anything more, the Sandaime nodded and urged them to go. But before they could, Kakashi remembered that they had been watching him. Their sensei looked them in the eye with a startlingly serious expression, and Sakura couldn't help but nod, obliquely acknowledging Sasuke doing the same next to her. "You are not to speak of what you saw during the confrontation on the bridge to anyone. Do you understand? Once I speak to Hokage Sama, this will likely become an S-rank secret. Nobody can know, unless the Sandaime himself gives you explicit permission to tell them. Understood?" their sensei said. Without even attempting to ask Sasuke-kun out on a date, she turned around, opened the door, and walked out, she was thinking about too much. Similar to training. While performing a basic hand seal and activating the silencing seals placed throughout the room by Uzumaki Mito and tuned only to the Hokage himself, Sarutobi Hiruzen gazed at Hitaki Kakashi with weary eyes. At the Hokage's direction, their nature made it completely impossible for any kind of recording or eavesdropping to function in this office. The White Fang's son sighed and collapsed in the chair across from him, as if all of his strength had vanished. The question that had been bothering the Sandaime ever since Team 7 arrived at his office could finally be asked now that the two Genin were gone. He said simply, "Kakashi-kun, where is Naruto-kun?" but was startled by the wide range of emotions concealed in those few words. The Shinobi no Kami, the god of shinobi, was him. He was aware that he shouldn't really care and couldn't afford to since his role as Hokage was meant to keep him from such luxuries, but he was unable to control his pure desire to find out how his surrogate grandson was doing. Like his parents, the boy was happy, quick to pick things up. Though most people didn't notice, he wasn't called the professor for nothing, and very charming. Hiruzen also had great expectations of him. When the Jonin clarified, in the hospital, the Sandaime's stomach fell. He added, needlessly, "I'm just a bunshin." The original is with him, since Hiruzen had long since observed that the man's chakra reserve had been neatly cut in half, in a way that was characteristic of Kage Bunshin use. Despite himself, Hiruzen grimaced. He asked, "How bad?" as the masked Nin's face turned into a glower, and he felt a pool of dread form in his stomach. Kakashi began, "He's in a coma and his chakra is fluctuating like nothing on earth," then steeled himself and went on. "His chakra reserves have doubled since it happened, and it's not showing signs of slowing. In fact, if anything, it seems to be gaining speed." The Sandaime scowled because Naruto had inherited at least a portion of his mother's special chakra, and Uzumaki had naturally large reserves. The fact that his reserves had already doubled suggested that he was getting close to Kage level reserves, which would lead to a whole new set of problems. However, Kakashi said 10 words that completely stunned Sarutobi before he could ask him a question. He also awoke the Sharingan and Kongo Fusa. Hiruzen's pipe choked him. With the exception of the Mokuton, wood release, and possibly the Shikatsumiku, dead bone pulse, of the Kagaya clan, which exhibited traits similar to those of the fabled Uzumaki bloodline, the Kongo Fusa was arguably the rarest bloodline in the shinobi nations. Only once in recent history has it been observed in two distinct users by the same individual, Uzumaki Mito, who had met both her grandfather and his gene successor, Uzumaki Kushina, albeit only very briefly for the latter. Since the Kongo Fusa gene was always passed down through direct familial descent, Hiruzen had always sensed that something was amiss there. That is, the user who came before Kushina had been one of her ancestors. However, Kushina's mother's matrilineal ancestry could be traced back approximately a century, as she was born to an Uzumaki mother and a male from the Kase no Kuni, land of wind, deserts. But her father had appeared as if by chance, a red-haired infant dropped in front of one of the clan war's strongholds, 8 years before the clan's demise, and only a few months after Hiruzen's birth. All that was left for him was a note that named him Uzumaki Atsushi and told him to be kind to him. 1. Because he had witnessed Kushina manifest the chains after Naruto's conception and even after the birth, and because the user always lost the ability once the child who would pass the gene on was conceived, Sarutobi had assumed that the Kongo Fusa, also known by some as just the Kusari, had finally gone extinct. He was aware that previous attempts to bring it out had failed, and that it was an odd bloodline that only appeared when certain conditions were met in the carrier's genes and chakra. In an effort to replicate the ability, his former pupil Orochimaru, who had a particular obsession with the bloodline, conducted one of his few authorized experiments and, with Kushina's reluctant consent, thoroughly examined her blood. He had only been able to determine that the Uzumaki's unique chakra was required for its growth, and since nobody else except Kushina herself had that at the time, the project had been abandoned. The Sharingan, too. He couldn't find it in himself to be surprised, so he thought, so the seal failed. In some ways, he had anticipated it, but he had secretly hoped it would not occur because it would cause far too many issues. After all, even though Jiraiya-kun is talented, he is nowhere near Mito Sama's level. Particularly since the seal had been put in, the Uchiha had all but disappeared. Given his powerful Uzumaki chakra, Naruto was unlikely to be able to pass on the Sharingan in the first place. The unique chakra of the Uzumaki clan was essentially a bloodline unto itself, and typically, after a few generations, it stopped other bloodlines from emerging within clan members. Although extremely rare, there were a few instances to the contrary. It had seemed nearly unnecessary to place a seal to keep Naruto from waking the Sharingan, but it seemed to have done nothing. Hiruzen felt a tiny twinge of anxiety. It was unprecedented that 2 of the 3 Kekkei Genkai that are known to man could simultaneously suppress a Biju in a single boy. And it was scary. And he was all too familiar with the Anbu guards he had had to use to keep Kushina safe from the few factions that knew she existed. To try to counteract the incursions, he had ultimately been forced to draft the Uzumaki herself into Anbu. That was not what he wanted for Naruto. Sarutobi let out a sigh. Hiruzen gulped, feeling every bit his age as he gazed intently at his successor's pupil. I know you have questions, Kakashi-kun, and I have some answers to give you, but first I must know. What happened? How did this eventuate? Did the Yondaime's seal? Did the Kyuubi escape? With his lone visible eye blind, Kakashi raked a hand through his spiky hair and peered out the window behind the elderly Sandame. His lengthy statement, I honestly have no idea, alarmed Hiruzen more than he would acknowledge. I felt its chakra for a moment, but it receded. If my timeline of events is correct, this happened after Naruto's Sharingan awakening, and prior to his unleashing the Kusari. After a moment of thoughtful chin rubbing, the professor quickly returned his attention to the shinobi in front of him. Sighing once more, the Sandame watched as the Kage Bunshin nodded and dispersed before writing out a brief note. I will have the seal checked. I would assume Naruto-kun called on the chakra sub consciously, and the Biju responded in a bid for freedom, but the seal prevented its full release. In any case, I shall arrange to have the seal reviewed and, if possible, tightened. Disperse yourself. I shall join your original in the hospital shortly. He brought a messenger, one of his younger monkey summons, to his side while biting his thumb. He handed it the note and grimaced as the little monkey chittered. Get me Jiraiya, he said, and started to fulfill his request. In what appeared to be an empty space, 2 figures sat. The place was just bright white and seemed to go on forever, so much so that it could only be described as such. Although the 2 figures seemed to be about the same age, one was actually a little older and the other a little younger. The younger asked, looking at his counterpart curiously, Are you sure we made the right decision, Oni? Sama? The figure nodded after turning to look solemnly at its younger sibling. The figure trailed off uncertainly, his distinctive eyes glazed over for a moment before snapping back to the present. Yes. It is the only hope for the scenario I foresaw. No other alternative allowed for such a desirable outcome. Although, he finally let out a sigh. I must confess, much is risked. So many possible divergences. Despite himself, the younger demanded angrily, then why? Normally, he wasn't easily enraged, but after all this time, to believe that such a thing could happen. Why not carry on with the cycle as usual? Is it preferable to entrust everything to one person? The younger brother's eyes widened as the elder insisted, yes, it is, after a brief pause for thought. Even more potential for divergence is permitted otherwise, and this way, all potential threats are dealt with, if the child can truly pull this off. Really? He whispered in surprise, unable to believe that such a desired result could truly come to pass. He had his hopes, of course, but to have them validated. Yes, but he will encounter a lot of difficulties on the path ahead, the elder said, nodding again in a tone that conveyed his confidence. The ongoing struggle his ideals will face, both internally and externally, is not the least of these. After a moment of humming and contemplation, the other person posed another query. Was it really necessary to bring out so much latent talent? As his older sibling shook his head negatively, he trailed off, surely having so much power will make him more predisposed towards. In actuality, if less was drawn out, the likelihood of a bad outcome increased. For this to work, he needs their respect, and having such innate talent was a prerequisite. The damage of having to wait this long has done that to us, but it won't ruin his relationship with either of them. In addition, the figure grimaced and said, to face the trials ahead, he will need every ounce of power he can get his hands on. Another memory from Kushina's point of view came to Naruto. The redhead walked slowly and resolutely toward the Konoha ambassador's house. She wasn't blind, but she had witnessed the impact the man had on Aiko.Oba, and Aiko. So it was time for her to correct the situation as soon as possible. Hopefully, her target hadn't left Uzushio to go back to his house yet, or else Kushina's damage control efforts might have been in vain and it would be too late. Didn't her evil, foolish boyfriend notice that she was in pain? Suffering? Carrying his child? Carrying Kushina's cousin? Her Oba-chan, auntie, was pregnant, and she refused to let him hurt her beloved Aiko.Oba anymore because of his actions. It didn't matter that she was only 5 years old, she would be 6 in a few months, and this was her Oba-chan. Kushina would be damned if she allowed this man to fail to fulfill his duties. Her Oba-chan was only 17, and it was all that man's fault that she would be a Ka-chan at 17. She went over to the ambassador's house, where the man was staying while in Uzushio, and knocked once, knowing that only her Oba-chan's boyfriend could be home because the ambassador was currently out of the village and Aiko was at Kushina's parents' house at the moment, so it was Kushina's responsibility to make things right. When the man opened the door, Kushina looked up and said, "Kushina-chan, how may I be of assistance to you today?" The figure smiled down at the girl and exclaimed jovially. The nearly 6-year-old said calmly, "If you make Aiko.Oba cry again, I'll force feed you your toes," and turned around and walked away. Jiraiya, who was standing in the now open doorway, slack-jawed, behind her, was completely confused and a little scared. As the Sandame entered the hallway outside Naruto's room, Kakashi stood and knelt before him, only getting up when his Hokage gave him the order. "So, how is he, Kakashi-kun?" Despite his grimace, Kakashi said, "The head medic is in with him now. Hokage-sama, he's waiting for you to arrive." "Well, then, come along Kakashi-kun," the Sandame hummed as he made his way to the door and then turned back to his motionless subordinate. He ignored the shocked copy.nin behind him and said, "We can't keep the doctor waiting." After all, the Sandame was notorious for denying anyone, even those close to the village's outcast, access to Naruto's hospital room. Yes, Kakashi was his sensei, but still. Oh god, he thought, his deep self-loathing coiled around his heart like a barbed tail. I have failed sensei and his son so badly, we all have. The last student of the Yondaime dutifully followed his leader into the hospital room that now belonged to his sensei's son. How hypocritical, he sarcastically remarked, that is the exact same problem I had. Although it's not like either of us would make decent role models, still, better a bad one than none at all, right? He should have been stronger, should have found the necessary willpower to take Naruto in when even the child's own godfather was too cowardly to do so. Alright, Koyanagi-san. What is wrong with Naruto-kun? The Hokage asked, and Kakashi instantly brought his focus back to the here and now. Koyanagi Akira was a tall, gray-haired and green-eyed man in his late 60s. He had been a student in the class after the Sandame in the Konoha Shinobi Academy, graduating as the Rookie of the Year. He had been drafted by Tsunade's mother, the then head of Konoha Hospital, almost immediately, demonstrating a proclivity towards the medical field. He had quickly risen as Senju Chikako's apprentice, achieving the rank of Chunin in his first attempt 1 year later, and being promoted to Tokubetsu Jonin within 2 years of that. After that, he had never bothered with his other skills, instead refining his Iryo ninjutsu to incredible levels. In turn, he had taught only 2 students, Yakushi Nono, a young prodigy in medical ninjutsu and intelligence gathering, who was taken in by Anbu at a young age, and Senju Tsunade herself. Of course, the latter was often busy with her team when she was younger, but she made time to learn all she could from her late mother's only student. In time, Tsunade had taken Akira's prodigious skills and evolved them to an unsurpassed level, earning her the title of most powerful medic nin in history. Although Koyanagi and Sarutobi had been relatively close friends in the past, a degree of tension had existed between them ever since the Second War, when Tsunade had tried to change the system and include medics on every team. Akira had been one of her main supporters, but even his word was not as good as the Hokage's, and he had been among those lamenting the loss of life, past, present, and future, caused by the decision. In addition, he was among the few villagers who knew Naruto's ancestry and the identities of the 2 Kyuubi Jinchuriki who came before him. Not well, Hokage-sama, the elderly doctor said with a sigh before turning to face his former companion. As far as I can tell, Naruto-kun's genetic composition is changing drastically, changing into a different person. I initially believed it to be the Kyuubi trying to transform his body into. The man shrugged a little and said sheepishly, well, something of a more desirable vessel, but he went on anyway, looking quite ashamed at having made such a bad assumption. As I have reviewed it, however, I have made several fascinating findings. The man abruptly stopped talking and turned to face the bed and its occupant, staring at Naruto with undisguised fascination. For a moment, he seemed to forget they were there, and only Kakashi's clearing of his throat forced him to return his focus to the other 2 men. All right, Koyanagi-san. The Sandame asked, and if Kakashi had been a lesser shinobi, he might not have noticed the slight tension in the man's body, as though he was waiting for an enemy trap to be set. How fascinating. Oh, naturally, the gentle old man appeared extremely embarrassed, but Kakashi sensed that he was not as self-conscious as he appeared to be. The man took a deep breath and then let it all out in a sudden exhalation or exclamation that said, "I think the Kyuubi has awakened Naruto-kun's dormant powers." Essentially, the Biju has evoked the Kekkei Genkai that have existed for roughly 3 generations of Naruto-kun's lineage. Kakashi choked on what little air he could get into his lungs, and the Sandaime choked on his pipe for the second time that day. The visions abruptly shifted. Naruto was thrown into his own memories rather than the haphazard ones of his 2 predecessors. It was among the most heinous things he had ever experienced as a child. He was hated for being Kyuubi Jinchuriki. There was another word he didn't remember learning. But the people were more resentful and careless than violent. There had been a few exceptions, though, and this memory was of one of them. While he watched the happy families go by, his younger form cried softly and clung to the swing he was sitting on. Naruto did not recall ever feeling this sad or angry, not in an outward sense, but rather an inward one. That is, angry and hateful and asking, "Why won't you acknowledge me?" with a hint of, "I'll show you," on the side. He had no recollection of feeling this, but he did. Naruto's 6-year-old form was suddenly overshadowed, and he looked up into manic, glazed red eyes. "Oh, the demon." Naruto's mind chanted a well-worn and frequently repeated mantra as the man, who appeared to be around 18 years old and had short, straight black hair, yelled, even as he grabbed hold of Naruto's retreating wrist. "I am not a demon. If I were a demon, Hokage Gigi would be the one to tell me so. Now, little demon, slow down. You see, my father was killed by you. He was a wonderful man. Yuhi Shinku, too," the man said with a slight slur, and Naruto wrinkled his nose at the smell of cheap alcohol, similar to what the orphanage matron drank frequently, and by frequently he meant, whenever the Hokage wasn't coming by to visit. He knew not to bring it up because he had been beaten for being a towel the last time, and he didn't like it. The fact that Naruto was accustomed to this by this point and didn't appear surprised that he had seemingly killed someone was rather telling. Instead, he repeatedly chanted his mantra in his mind, pleading with the man to leave, but the man laughed and tightened his hold. "Little fox, I'm going to make you scream." As you killed him, he did the same. Suddenly, the man screamed and thrust a kunai into Naruto's stomach, embedding it up to the hilt. When Naruto's mantra finally broke, he let out a scream and vaguely recognized the sound of the man's crazed laughter as he took the kunai away and slashed again. Naruto recalled that it finally made sense, but the feelings, hatred, rage, agony, disgust, and pure anger, did not. He had never realized that he was capable of such intense hatred. He remembered that he had been dropped abruptly, but instead of feeling the pain of the hard ground as his confused mind had anticipated, he had been held against what felt like the body of someone at least a few years older than himself. Other than his luminous red, Tomo eyes, he could not make much out of the older figure. "Wah. What?" Hiruzen asked quietly, barely believing what he was hearing. Since most Kekkei Genkai users passed the gene on to their child with little difficulty, after all, chakra had a tendency to draw out latent abilities on its own, to strengthen its user. It wasn't really necessary to draw out latent Kekkei Genkai. Orochimaru's research into the Kongo Fusa was just one of many attempts in his long history of attempted bloodline replication. However, things were different within the Uzumaki. Because the Uzumaki vitality was so strong and unique, Orochimaru had been particularly interested in it. He had researched the ability and tried to extract latent Kekkei Genkai from the DNA, which Sarutobi had thought was because Orochimaru wanted the best for the village and a stronger Kushina certainly didn't hurt it. However, the chakra was simply too special. Therefore, for this to occur, was how? Beside him, Kakashi muttered incredulously, and the head medic appeared to consider the question for a moment before letting out a sigh. "To be honest, Kakashi-kun, I don't know. My only conclusion is that the Kyuubi were involved." The man was abruptly interrupted as the Sandaime hurried past him, lifting the hem of the blonde's jumpsuit jacket and gazing at the seal. "The seal does seem to be less powerful than when I last saw," they said. "The seal that is visible." It was intended that the visible seal would only show up when Naruto was channeling the Kyuubi's chakra. "Oshish. T." Koyanagi appeared unconcerned, and Kakashi and his superior both paled significantly. "Is this bad, Hokage Sama?" Both men came within millimeters of face planting when the man asked. "Yes, it is. This indicates that the Kyuubi's chakra is being actively channeled," cried Kakashi. "That explains the traces of Biju chakra in his system." "Oh." The green-eyed man trailed off thoughtfully, before snapping his fingers in sudden epiphany. Sarutobi wondered incredulously, why did I associate with this man, in the past? Maybe time had jumbled his former friend's mind. Koyanagi-san, while that is a logical conclusion, I must admit it doesn't completely explain the situation, Hiruzen said softly. Naruto-kun awakened the Kusari, which Kushina had not passed on, as per that particular gene's nature, at the time. Normally, that would indicate a flaw in my hypothesis, he agreed, and Akira hummed thoughtfully before nodding. But, as you know, I treated both Kushina and Mito Sama, when the latter was in her final years. The Sandame's eyes widened in realization, but Kakashi still appeared perplexed by the information. I am detecting substantial amounts of both of their chakra signatures within Naruto's own, seemingly blending with it, Kakashi said. Though it wasn't exactly the same, Hiruzen was scolding himself inwardly for not noticing it sooner. He had been close to both Mito and Kushina, and now that he thought about it, he could detect trace amounts of both of their chakra in among Naruto's, indicating that the three were combining to create an entirely new chakra signature, alongside the bloodline chakra that Naruto now possessed. However, this didn't explain how. The man went on, which brings me to my next item of importance. Hokage Sama. I think Naruto-kun is directly descended from Mito Sama. At this point, the elder woman was still young and youthful, appearing to be a few years older than he was, and she was frowning as Naruto was reliving one of her memories, but from a different era. The man in front of her said softly, Mito-chan, I know you don't like this, but our alliance with the Senju has been unstable lately. We need to reassure them that we have crossed some lines that they believe their sibling clan shouldn't. According to what I've observed, the boy is the eldest nephew of the current clan head and is quite pleasant. After giving the man a fierce look, Mito turned to face the other person in the room and nodded rigidly. Oto Sama, did you also agree to this? She bit out coldly, a nasty bite to her words that left Naruto shivering. Damn, this lady was intimidating, even when he was her. Not allowing the man to speak, she turned back to the eldest and continued, fuming. The disrespect, to anticipate that the eldest of the clan heir will wed into a relatives on the side. OG Sama, I don't understand why you tolerate this disrespect. With another sigh, the oldest man looked at his son, who responded on his behalf. Mito, her father said, and her head turned to face him evenly, her stomach churning with repressed bitter anger and hatred. We have already crossed too many boundaries, he said. We are not as strong as the Uchiha or Senju, despite the Uzumaki's strength. We may have a large number and formidable Fuinjutsu and Kenjutsu, but unlike our sister clan, we have never been proficient in ninjutsu or genjutsu. This is one of the conditions they demanded, and we need this alliance. HMPH. Why not just leave the clan wars entirely? When her father looked at her disbelievingly, she continued, Oh, don't give me that look. Everyone here knows that the idea has been on both of your minds before, more than once. There's no point in us fighting this battle. Humming reflectively, the man nodded and said, Maybe, but we can't run. This is not the Uzumaki way, particularly when our honor and family are at stake. Furthermore, he continued, his tone becoming gravely serious, I genuinely don't think the Senju, or even Uchiha, would just sit by and let us end this war. We have murdered too many Uchiha over the ages for the Senju to just let the past be the past. The Senju depend on their allies. Her grandfather said, as your clan head, I am issuing this order, and I'm afraid your father is right, Mito. Mito, who had never been able to contain her anger toward her grandfather for long because he was far too kind, owed it to him to believe him when he said that there were no other options. Sadly, it is a necessity to protect the future of the clan, even if I wish it did not come at such a cost. The elderly man's sincere sadness spoke volumes, and Mito found herself calming down. He smiled and said, We won't talk about this anymore, tomorrow. I have to leave for the alliance meeting at Amaterasu no Tani, Valley of Amaterasu. Let's unwind this evening. Beside him, Kakashi had resumed his choking, gasping for air that simply refused to come, and based on the glint in the Sandame's eyes, Akira was enjoying the response he received. The Sandame's eyes widened comically, his composure slipping in a rare moment of complete bewilderment. A bastard. After much effort, the shinobi no Kami managed to regain control of his mouth and trailed off in shock, asking, How? Why would you say that, Koyanagi-san? He found it difficult to keep his voice level while suppressing his own awe at what might very well be the validation of his own long-held convictions. He and his sister had been friends with Uzumaki Atsushi, to the extent that she had named her son after him after he passed away. The timing was suspicious, as it was not widely known that Hashirama, Sama and Mito, Sama's marriage had been loveless for many years, a political union to fortify the waning ties between the Uzumaki and Senju. The old rumors circulating around the Senju clan compound had long implied she had been having an affair outside the clan, as she had disappeared for a specific year before returning, the year Atsushi was born, though few ever made that final connection. Additionally, Kushina had acquired the Kusari, which could only suggest a direct descent from Uzumaki Hoshihiro, Mito's grandfather. Yes, indeed. The integration of her chakra would not be working so well if they weren't related, even on the limited level of two shinobi of the same clan. The Irio.Nin cried, apparently unaware of his cage's inner thoughts. Since his body isn't rejecting her chakra at all, it probably recognizes it as a kind of progenitor. Very fascinating, the man said, trailing off once more while giving Naruto a look that made both shinobi shudder. The Sharingan, too? The Sandaime winced as Kakashi interrupted abruptly, saying, "This isn't going to be a pleasant conversation." Hiruzen grabbed the man's full attention and said, Kakashi-kun, you know about Minato Kun's birth parents, and how they died when he was a child. It was a sad story, really. Kazu, a woman with purple hair and cerulean blue eyes, and Satoru, a man with spiky blonde hair and brown eyes, coming together and having a child. They had both come from tragic backgrounds, losing their parents when they were young, only to find each other again. The whole thing was tragic, especially when Kazu and Satoru, along with the attending hospital staff, had been killed by a member of the military police, whom Minato's parents had saved from attacking their newborn son at their own lives. Sarutobi had made sure that the public was not aware of Minato's parents, fearing that the man who killed them had done so under duress. What you didn't know is the circumstances behind that, the professor added, receiving a nod in return. As you can see, Minato Kun's parents, Kazu and Satoru, belonged to the Senju and Uchiha clans, respectively. Unable to comprehend, Kakashi gazed at the Shinobi no Kami. Although the two clans had founded Konoha, they had never interbred because clan relations had never improved to this degree. Why, Hokage? Sama? I believed Senju and Uchiha. Love, Hiruzen replied simply, and it was sufficient to explain everything. Satoru and Kazu met as children, both taken in by a mutual family friend, Uchiha Kagami, he said, nodding sorrowfully and grinning wistfully at the memory of the two. Because they both lost their parents when they were young, they bonded quickly, and as time went on, their bond deepened. Of course, Uchiha Kagami was Sasuke, Kun's grandfather, and Obito, Kun's great-uncle, he concluded, and Kakashi recalled that he had taken a D rank as a genin and had been caring for the Uchiha man's garden. Unlike many Uchiha, he was unfathomably kind, and he had been assigned directly under the Nidaime during the First Shinobi World War. He also recalled, somewhat belatedly, that Obito had introduced him as his super awesome Uji-chan. Kakashi felt somewhat relieved that the good-natured man had passed away before his clan was brutally massacred by his own grandson as well. All right. Did Kazu and Satoru's Uchiha, Senju child cause their deaths? The Sandaime nodded again when Kakashi asked. Indeed, the man said, letting out a sorrowful sigh at the thought. Even though we couldn't prove it, it was clear that the murderers, who were Konoha police force members, were acting on orders. My only options were to have Mito Sama seal away Minato Kun's Keke Genkai, pretend that he had died, and assign him to a reliable shinobi with a fictitious last name. That was truly the beginning of the conflict between the Uchiha and the village. Much hope had been placed on Minato-kun to be the final bridge between the two clans. After all, despite what some people said, the division between clans remained even today, if not to the same extent as it once did. I would assume that Kazu is where Naruto gained his Uchiha DNA from. If not, he may have been targeted again, and I would not allow another to die the same cruel, pointless death that those two suffered, the Sandaime concluded, acknowledging inwardly how bad inter-clan relations became after that. Koyanagi cheerfully added, actually, Hokage Sama, that is another thing, and the legendary shinobi simply knew that whatever was going to be said would make matters even more complicated. The doctor's next statement confirmed his suspicions. From what I have seen so far, there is too much Uchiha DNA present for Naruto to be receiving it from just Kazu and her parents. Now that the majority of Naruto-kun's lineage is known, I think Mito Sama's mystery lover was probably a Uchiha. Unfortunately for Kakashi, He was only choking on air, and it was unlikely that he could give that up for a day. Sarutobi quit smoking his pipe today, as it appeared to have developed an unhealthy attraction to the back of his throat. Really? How? Why? Kakashi asked, knowing the story of Uzumaki Mito, or Senju Mito as most people knew her. The two legendary lovers were a kunoichi and a powerful shinobi, both of whom were extremely strong in their own right, but together, rumored to be unbeatable. Their love was as legendary as the two themselves, said by some to be one of those rare bonds that would never expire. It seemed too absurd to be true that she would have a fling with a shinobi from a clan made up of her lover's worst enemies. Akira replied, apparently embarrassed by the admission, I can't answer that, but he went on anyway. All I can speculate is that the relationship was brief, and during the time when Hashirama, Sama and Mito. Sama's relationship was merely an arranged marriage, and nothing more. Unaware of that fact, Kakashi arched an eyebrow, and Sarutobi nodded slowly. Thank you, Koinagi-san. What else is there? He desperately needed a break, so he sincerely hoped there was nothing else. The man rewarded him with a head shake. Not right now, Hokage. Sama. However, I'll be honest. I don't know how to handle Naruto-kun. This case is unique. If he wakes up at all, it might take a long time. After 2 days it was unfortunate that he had to speak to a contact here, as there were very few onsens in Kei's no Kuni, so he would have to wait to affirm his claim to the illustrious title of super pervert. As he strolled through one of the desert cities on the border of Kei's no Kuni, an exceptionally tall figure allowed his eyes to pass over the fine specimens that the community had to offer. The female form was such a beautiful thing, and he needed to get inspiration for his next masterpiece. The toad sage grimaced as a small monkey suddenly walked into his line of sight. Jiraiya stared at the offending creature and contemplated ignoring it, but decided against it. His sensei seldom felt the need to call his lone devoted pupil unless it was absolutely necessary. He took the message and ignored the creature's weak attempts to pull him back toward Konoha by the leg of his trousers. His eyes widened as he read the hurriedly scrawled text, and he turned and ran for his birth village, hardly remembering to make a cage. Bunshin to stay behind and talk to his contact before scattering. The little monkey summon, left behind him in the dust, chittered in bewilderment and then scattered. After 2 days, again, Jiraiya, there has been more, but nothing I feel comfortable sharing in a message like this. Naruto has returned from a C rank turned A rank mission. His seal has weakened considerably, and he has gone into a coma. Come back soon. Sensei. Jiraiya considered those words as he made his way to his sensei's office. Since Orochimaru's defection, 3, and the final breakup of the Sannin, he and Sarutobi had not been on good terms for more than 9 years. Technically, they had not been a team since Tsunade had finally found the strength to leave the ninja force in the middle of the Third Shinobi World War, leaving behind her village and comrades in a long, planned decision, with no regard for those she left behind. Of course, by then, they had become extremely dysfunctional. Tsunade and her drinking, leaving the ninja force due to her hemophobia. Orochimaru's descent into madness, which was not immediately apparent except for his obsession with his experiments. Jiraiya's own grief over losing all of his students except Minato, along with his girlfriend and unborn child. And finally, Hiruzen's depression and stress due to his position, with the distance between him and his family and friends making the situation even worse. He and his sensei both held each other partially responsible for the disintegration of their team, even though they both knew that the real cause was elsewhere. They were simply too proud and stubborn to acknowledge it first, which put them at a standstill. If one of the other two were to return, they might be able to start mending their relationship, but as it was unlikely. Jiraiya, who had hopped straight up to the windowsill in his sensei's office, waved languidly as he walked in front of the Hokage's desk. The man turned to the toad sage, his eyes looking sorrowfully at the form of his last faithful pupil, and Jiraiya had never seen the old monkey so exhausted. Sensei, he said simply, as an introduction, as if he hadn't been gone for more than 5 years and hadn't seen his godson in nearly 8 years. The boy probably didn't even remember him, not that he'd blame him, because who would want to remember a failure like him? You got my message in quite good time, the man said idly, and Jiraiya could sense the slight disapproval. It took him only 4 days to reach his destination, so he was easily located by a simple monkey summons. Jiraiya, the Sandaime replied, measured and always courteous, but nothing more. I was in the general neighborhood, meeting with a contact, he said simply, and the older of the two merely hummed thoughtfully, okay. Damn these games. Tired of avoiding the problem at hand. This was his godson, and even if he was far more absent than he should be, he would own up to his mistakes and face them. The only overt sign of dissatisfaction on the Sannin's face was a minute clenching in his jaw. For Naruto. For Kushina and Minato. How awful is Naruto? He looked at the man with concealed concern and asked the question carefully. Oh, said Sarutobi quietly, his tone tinged with mocking shock. Why Jiraiya-kun, I didn't know you cared. That's a low blow, sensei, and you know it, Jiraiya said, gritting his teeth and glaring at the elderly man with all the contempt he could muster, and Kami knew there was plenty of it. After humming once more, the Hokage sighed and said, maybe it was, Jiraiya-kun. Let me give you an update on what has happened in the past few days. After the Toad Sage had calmed down from the repeated shocks to his body, he looked toward Konoha's hospital, and without even saying goodbye, the man left his sensei's office, leaving him to tell him later if he had anything else to say. The Yondaime's sensei ran through the streets, not even looking at the sign for the nearest onsen, and hurried to the Konoha hospital. He had only made a brief visit to his godson since the death of his last student, as a result of his intense grief and self-blame, claiming that Minato had died as a result of his training and that the man who had been his son in all but blood was now gone, leaving only small trinkets behind and not enough time to leave memories in the child's life. Occasionally, he received reports about incidents that happened, such as the insane Chunin who had attacked Naruto when the boy was 6 years old. As the man's personal executor, Jiraiya had not regretted his actions, despite the fact that the man had screamed and begged at his public execution, at the testimony to the severity of attacking Uzumaki Naruto, or as he cried, screamed profanities, or made weak defenses. Jiraiya had only regretted his foolishness in failing to ensure that Naruto was far, far away from the execution, far away from the gory scene. Nevertheless, the final devoted Sannin had lifted his gaze from the man's corpse, to the assembled crowd, to the surrounding buildings, and a horrified realization had passed through him as he looked into his godson's amazing, blue eyes. The sight of those eyes reminded him of another pair of eyes, too similar, which had also witnessed death for the first time, and he was too weak to do anything about it a second time, so he had never even had the courage to go and comfort the child. Shaking the memory away, Jiraiya went inside, using the door, as Naruto's current room probably had no windows, given the seriousness of his case, and proceeded to the reception desk. After a few brief questions, he was met by his sensei halfway there, and the man fell into step beside him without a single word or glance. Once they were inside, they discovered Kakashi sitting there, staring sadly at the young shinobi in the bed. The man looked up and was about to bow, but Jiraiya waved him away. Kakashi turned back to the Hokage and sighed. There has been no evidence of a repeat event, Hokage. Sama, the shinobi said to the Hokage, and the elderly man nodded slowly, even as the Toad Sage turned to the two at the question. Repeat event? What else could have happened? He asked cautiously, to the grimace of the other two men in the room. With a sigh, the Sandame turned to face his pupil and started to describe what had happened. Well. A flashback to 2 days ago. Kakashi sat at his student's bedside, looking desolately at the young shinobi. He had let another teammate down, and now a comrade, a child, was suffering as a result. To make matters worse, it was his sensei's child. At that moment, Kakashi felt more like the failure he was than ever before. Even though Sasuke was still bugging Kakashi and the Sandame about Naruto's ancestry, they both agreed when he spoke to them about the nature of the abilities the blonde had awakened and the importance of keeping them secret. They had only informed the boy that there was Uchiha DNA within 3 generations of the boy's ancestry and that they would tell him when they could pinpoint it precisely. The Uchiha were still very interested in the matter, and a little desperate for information, but they had been placated for the time being. Kakashi leapt back in surprise as Naruto's eyes suddenly opened, and the blonde blinked in surprise before focusing on Kakashi. Sakumo.kun. The copy.nin felt his blood run cold as the blonde asked, "What am I doing?" The seal. The blonde abruptly stopped as he pulled his hospital robes up from under the sheets with exaggerated movements, causing Kakashi to send 2 Kage Bunshin to warn Koyanagi.san and the Hokage. What? How? What the hell is going on? Why? The blonde screeched, staring at his body in incredulity. Turning his attention to Kakashi, he pointed accusingly at the Yondaime's last student before frowning. Hitaki.kun, you don't look well, he commented suddenly, and a fresh wave of confusion flooded through Kakashi's mind. How did I wind up inside the body of this boy? It seemed impossible for Kakashi's blood to get any colder. KY. Kyubi? His voice was quiet in the otherwise quiet room as he asked in shock. Oh, no, the blonde snorted. Hold on, how are you aware of that? The blonde trailed off thoughtfully, looking at Kakashi in a peculiar way, That's classified information, and you're Tsukumo.kun. No, although you look alike. Distinct. How? He insisted, and Kakashi was forced to comply. Hitaki Tsukumo was my father, he replied, shielding himself from the acrid sting those words evoked by erecting a wall of the icy darkness where his feelings should be. How would you know that, Naruto? He said idly, his mask of indifference only broken by the intensity in his one visible eye. Naru. 2. The Yondaime's son questioned slowly, blinking owlishly. Who is Naruto? He inquired. Kakashi's heart briefly stopped pounding. The door suddenly flew open, revealing the hospital's head medic standing there, staring at the figure on the bed in an odd way. Koyanagi.kun. The blonde exclaimed, and both Kakashi and Akira were floored. What on earth? You look so old. Anyo. The doctor trailed off, raising an eyebrow at the figure on the bed, who huffed and glared at the man. Well, Naruto.kun, I am turning 68 this year. This, Naruto, person you keep referring to me is not me. Really, who names their child after a topping from ramen? Something Kushina-chan would do. Do. The blonde trailed off thoughtfully. Suddenly, his eyes widened. How did? What, of all the things that damned fox could do, it should know better than to mess with an Uzumaki seals. Mistress, he cried, his face colored with rage as his voice rose higher, spiking in the room with a sense of aimless killing intent. Am I? Mito. Sama. The green-eyed man looked at the figure on the bed with trepidation and asked a soft, incredulous question. The aforementioned figure turned to face the man and gave a single nod, letting out a sigh of appreciation. Yes. The Kyuubi seems to have inserted my consciousness into this boy's body. However, I have to know how this child became Jinchuriki. With a confused glance between the two men, the blonde asked softly. Kakashi was stunned. Had his student vanished, completely replaced by the Shodai's wife? Had he lost his body to the Kyuubi's schemes against his will? How could this have happened at all, unless… Aren't you similar to Naruto? A Jinchuriki, he explained, as the figure looked at him bewildered and gave him another nod of the head. He asked softly, incredulously, because there was no way he could have expected to find something like this when he came to visit his student today. The Hokage came in at that moment. Hello, Hiruzen? Mito. Naruto questioned incredulously, staring at the man in something akin to horror. You're so old. They burst out laughing, and Kakashi couldn't stop the slightly manic chuckle that came out. As it did so, he viciously smothered its colleagues, barely avoiding the proverbial jutsu while Sarutobi gave him a weird look before focusing his confused eyes on the blonde. Naruto.kun, I'm afraid that occurs when you're my age. How do you feel? At the odd expression Mito. Naruto kept giving him, he trailed off, we weren't expecting you to wake this soon. Akira interrupted, looking from his superior to his charge, Hokage. Sama, Naruto.kun says he is. Mito. Sama. Damned medics and their dramatics. Hiruzen was suddenly very glad he had left his pipe in his office today. I trust, by your current attire, that you are still Hokage, Saru? Mito. Naruto asked, looking thoughtfully at the three shinobi and seemingly choosing their words carefully before turning to face the Sandaime. I chose a successor, but he died when Kushina's seal failed during childbirth, Sarutobi replied, nodding, secretly relieved that the Uzumaki had opted for one of Mito. Sama's less embarrassing. Endearments. Actually, you knew Minato.kun. He and Kushina's son sealed the Kyuubi within them. Your great grandson, Naruto. Mito. Naruto had a pale face. So, the blonde muttered, their tone tinted with suppressed agony, you. No, then. The aged Hokage looked at him with hard eyes that held a hint of treachery. Did Tsunade tell you? That explained a lot, of course. Hiruzen blinked in surprise. Having recently lost her brother in a pre-war skirmish, Tsunade had been devastated by the news of her grandmother's death, but she had pushed herself forward with a vengeance, taking it upon herself to raise and support Mito's appointed successor, Uzumaki Kushina, and staying with her grandmother in her last years. Kushina and Tsunade had bonded rather quickly, and Tsunade had become the young girl's rock, especially after hearing about Uzushio's fall in the opening battle of the Second Shinobi World War, just months after Kushina had arrived in Konoha. And Tsunade had raged. She had been just as distraught in her grief as so many others. For example, Hiruzen and his sister had lost a man who was essentially a brother to them. Orochimaru had bonded with the Ranmaiku clan of Uzushio and had even been allowed to enter their ancestral home, the Ryuchi Cave, and sign the snake summoning contract. Jiraiya had finally fallen in love with a woman other than Tsunade, only to be killed along with so many others from her clan. Mito had lost her beloved younger brother and so many old friends. Kushina herself had lost her entire family and her entire village. Kushina had vowed in blood that she would remove Kirigakure from the map, and Tsunade would have assisted her had she not been ordered away to other borders. Sarutobi sighed, recalling the gap in their relationship that had been created when Kushina had returned from a third war mission half dead, long after the trauma of losing Dan had turned into hemophobia, and because of the bloodshed and Kushina's near-death experience. Tsunade had been unable to bring herself to visit the girl in the hospital. Yes, she had tried. She had even managed to get a few feet in the door before she came across a man who was being wheeled past on a gurney, bleeding heavily. But it had not gone well, and if anything, her hemophobia had gotten worse afterward. She had been sincerely sorry, and pleaded with Kushina to understand and forgive her when she left. Naturally, however, Kushina had not comprehended. Yes, she had screamed and been furious, asking how the so-called best medic in Konoha, if not the entire world, could have allowed someone who was supposedly important to her to come so close to death. Tsunade had acted because it had touched a nerve. Kushina had been punched through a wall by her. Despite Kushina's best efforts, Tsunade gathered her belongings, left the village that night, never to return, and took the recently adopted Shizune. Kushina, beaten, bloodied, and emotionally and psychologically hurt, had angrily declared that she never wanted to speak to Tsunade again after the argument had been ended forcibly, leaving her with multiple broken bones and hyperventilating as she attempted to get away from her bleeding leg that had been nicked by one of Kushina's Kongo Fusa. It would be logical to assume that Tsunade's previous intimacy with Kushina resulted from her awareness of her close kinship with the young Uzushio survivor. No, said Sarutobi honestly, his eyes looking directly into Mito. Naruto's and conveying his sincerity, I didn't even know that Tsunade Haim was aware of this. The Sandaime added, although, if you have any ideas as to how exactly this happened, that would be appreciated. Mito. Naruto sighed and gave the man a small apologetic smile. We ourselves only discovered it because your chakra and Naruto Kun's are merging far too easily for you to be anything other than directly related. With a reflective hum, Mito. Naruto's eyes briefly closed before opening. I had a hypothesis regarding being Jinchuriki. That even after extraction, a tiny, lingering amount of chakra would latch on, for want of a better term, to the Biju's own. The Kyuubi must have been more aware than I had assumed of what was happening outside the seal. That or echoes of the memories the Jinchuriki had before the Biju was extracted, including memories from before the Biju was sealed within the host in the first place, were also present in the residual chakra. Actually, I'd say it's the latter, since I also have my memories from before the sealing. They hummed once more, rubbing their chin thoughtfully. Though not as strongly as mine, I can also sense Kushina's chakra presence. It's almost like it's attached to the seal. In any case, Hiruzen scowled at her last remark, which made no sense at all. Do you know how to stop this? It's seriously harming Naruto Kun's mental state. Mito would be the one to fix this, but the blonde merely shook their head. Mito. Naruto replied with a sorrowful sigh, no, I'm afraid not, but he would find it much easier if he had a seal to apply. Allow the memories to gradually become ingrained in his mind rather than erasing them. If this works, he should hopefully wake up in a day, and the damage will probably go away gradually as Naruto adjusts to his new memories. They flinched, looking anxiously at the Sandaime. Saru, some of my memories are not nice at all. Furthermore, I doubt that Kushina's life was as simple as I had hoped. As he works through this, he will require assistance. Kakashi, who had mostly remained silent during the meeting, nodded in place of Hiruzen. I promise you, Mito Sama, Naruto will have all the help he needs, he said. I will not let Minato Sensei and Kushina Sama's son suffer needlessly. Mito. Naruto nodded, apparently comforted by the man's conviction. Koyanagi, who had hurried out of the room without their knowledge to get a scroll and ink, came back and gave the two things to the Jinchuriki, who started making the seal. Sarutobi started applying the seal as Mito. Naruto faded into unconsciousness. 4. End of flashback. Koyanagi came into the room as Jiraiya was processing that information. Jiraiya.kun. Ah, I think you haven't had a medical examination in a long time. The green-eyed man cried with a gleeful exclamation, his eyes conveying a sadistic glee that only a particularly terrifying medic could possess. To enable me to. Would you mind checking in? Fix that? The three other men in the room all shivered at the same time. Tsunade's terrible bedside manner was also attributed to Koyanagi Akira, who was notoriously intrusive during medical examinations, even to the extent of accidentally hurting his patients during check-ups, and then trying to pass it off as some terrible disease they had contracted. As he grew older, his behavior only worsened, especially for those who needed a constant clean bill of health, such as the village's elite. Once more, the three men shuddered. "I am. Ah. Cowards," Jiraiya nervously interrupted, glancing at the other two men with a look that was half fear and half a desperate plea for assistance. "I'm afraid I don't have time for that right now, Doctor." "Trash. That's an order," Akira replied with a smile, "and not even the Hokage can revoke this specific one." The man cheerfully demanded, "March," and Jiraiya swallowed. "However, we must discuss my godson," and in spite of what everyone else would say to the contrary, he didn't complain at all. With an unwavering smile, Koyanagi waved. Of course," he said. "However, your conversation can wait until after you've finished the test, I'm sure." Jiraiya swallowed once more and trailed after the man. Damn that crazy old coot and his insane theories. Suffering from prostrate problems my ass. Jiraiya hobbled back to the Hokage's office an hour later, waddling like a penguin with something unfortunate in a similarly unfortunate place, which, admittedly, was not too far from the truth. "Oh yeah, very funny," he said, glaring at the Hokage as he jumped up through the window and sat down in the chair across from him, wincing. "I swear, I don't understand why that guy chose to become a doctor rather than T&I. Sarutobi responded by bursting into real, raucous laughter. "Well, Jiraiya-kun, we do still have a problem," the monkey summoner said after he had calmed down, looking fixedly at his final devoted pupil. Mito Sama stated that Naruto-kun should have woken up by now, but he hasn't yet. This is just beyond Koyanagi-san's abilities, the man sighed sadly, looking up at the portrait of Minato on the wall. In addition, the trauma to his mind is extensive, and still increasing, since he hasn't had a chance to assimilate all the information yet. Jiraiya smiled and said, "Well then, I know exactly who to get and how." After 2 weeks, the woman, dressed in a gray, sleeveless kimono, like blouse over which she wore a green haori, hesitantly counted her winnings while her assistant talked animatedly. She wore dark bluish, gray pants and an obi to match, open-toed, strapped black sandals with high heels on her feet, red nail polish on her fingernails and toenails, and pink lipstick. A necklace around her neck featured a single, long turquoise gem in the center, with 2 small metal balls on either side of it. Her skin was pale, her hair was tied in 2 loose ponytails, her eyes were brown, and she had a curious diamond-shaped mark in the middle of her forehead. She was accompanied by a slender, fair-skinned woman with a female pet pig in her arms. She had black eyes, shoulder-length black hair framing her face, and a long, bluish, black kimono with white trimmings, a white obi holding it together, and low-heeled, open-toed sandals. The pig, interestingly, had a pearl collar and a dark red jacket. Both women stood and gaped at the man in disbelief as a familiar figure suddenly fell in front of them. "Heim, please," he started, and Jiraiya's eyes lifted to meet his former teammates, staring into them with a serious intensity that was unfamiliar to him. She opened her mouth to respond immediately, but was stopped by the desperation in the man's eyes, which she recognized because she had seen that look a lot as a medic and was certain that it had been reflected in her own eyes multiple times in her life. The terrified, anxious expression of someone who is going to lose a loved one. He went on, "Please," and she nearly said yes at that very moment because, despite everything she had been through and the number of people she had lost, she didn't want her teammate to experience the suffering she knew all too well again. "Please save our godson." Tsunade let out a gasp. Naruto had another memory as seen through Mito's eyes. With a quiet giggle, Mito turned over and lay on her stomach next to her lover. "You know, if people saw you like this, they might reconsider their opinions of you. You're looking decidedly, oh how shall I put this, friendly right now." A smirk twisted the man's lips as he snorted and rolled his black eyes. Despite his undressed state, he said matter-of-factly, "If you were to tell a soul, I just insist you were lying," while lying on his back on the futon. The room around them was a basic hotel with a single futon and basic amenities, located in one of the many towns of Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire. They didn't really need it, and Mito's fuinjutsu gave them all the privacy they could possibly require. Besides, you wouldn't dare. You're a married woman. Senju Mito, the dearest wife of Senju Hashirama. Mother of his daughter, Senju Chikako. I'd simply claim you used your incredible fuinjutsu skills to control me. Hell, even your husband would believe me. Ridiculous, she snorted back, kissing his temple lightly before stepping back with a smug smile. The feared Sharingan no Oni, demon of the Sharingan, would never fall to such paltry skills. In fact, his almighty dojutsu would ensnare a poor, defenseless Uzumaki woman right up, so he could take her away and have his wicked way with her. At her words, he turned on his side and looked at her, smiling broadly. He stuck his tongue out at the woman and swiftly pulled it back when she attempted to trap it between her thumb and forefinger. "Oh, I'm so glad you approve of my skills. And we both know that you are no slouch yourself. Miss, I like younger men," he said. She said, "So I'm a cougar and a pedophile," with an unabashed shrug. Her next words were a breath on his lips as she pulled his face to hers for a kiss. A slight smile on her face. "Doesn't mean you don't love it." Her lover said, "HN," but still gave in to her advances. But he stopped her as her hands started to stray lower. "No, Mito." With a sigh, she sat up on her elbows and leaned away. "We're out of time already? And making it work this way was really hard. Spending time together on the eve of their birthdays twice a year. Not any less passionate for it, but a quiet, hidden love. Many would have given up on it years ago, but it was all worthwhile when they met on their scheduled outings because of the way his normally icy eyes would light up with suppressed love and adoration. A single glance made all the secrets, all the lies, and all the years of unspoken love worthwhile. They didn't mince words, even when they clashed on the battlefield. They each had scars from the other, and they had total control over their emotions. She vividly recalled the first time he used his tongue to trace the scar on her stomach, which he had given her just 2 weeks prior, as he. "Mito," he said quietly, jerking her out of her reverie, "what's wrong?" She turned back to him and grinned at the unspoken worry in his voice. "Nothing, love. Just sick of hiding this." He got up and started dragging his clothes on, moving slowly and theatrically to impress his lover. With a frown, he acknowledged, "It is tedious, but unless you can think of a way to bring this out in the open without turning everyone we know against us. And trust me, I'm open to any ideas. Then we're stuck in this situation." Unbelieving for a moment, she suggested, "We could run away together?" And he knew that too, based on the disbelieving expression he gave her. He ran a hand through his spiky hair and shook his head at her. He laughed when she started laughing at his remark. "Don't be ridiculous. We're both too protective of our little brothers. Plus, you're a mother, even if you're stuck in a loveless marriage with a halfwit," he said. His expression abruptly became serious. "Never lose your laugh, Mito. It's one of my favorite things about you." She smirked up at the man and said, "That and the sex," to which he reciprocated. "That too," he concurred as he completed putting on his basic blue high-collared shirt with the Uchiha fan on the back and blue trousers. He wore a pair of black enclosed shoes, a plain sash as a belt, and bandages tied around his wrists and shins. At last, he straightened up and sighed. "Anyway, I need to go." He laughed as soon as he saw arms wrapped around his waist. She said, "Say it, love, like you always do," with sincerity. One of her favorite parts was this. Since that night all those years ago, when fate had separated them, a tradition has been upheld. It stung enough, but not for long. Stung Mito, trapped in a loveless marriage, was raising a daughter for whom she had worried about the paternity of her entire pregnancy. Stung her love, made to lead a lie in a life he never desired, and battled a friend he held in the highest regard. His response was, "I shall love you, always," as he gave her a gentle smile over his shoulder. She grinned and said, "I love you too, Madara-chan," and he left with a snort and a huff. Neither of them realized that they would not cross paths again until more than 8 years later, when Konohagakure was established. Furthermore, Mito was undoubtedly ignorant at the time that she would become a mother once more, giving birth to Uchiha Madara's heirs 9 months later. And poor Naruto, who was watching the entire scene in morbid fascination, was left feeling a little traumatized and blushing a little. With disbelief and a glimmer of hope in her heart, Tsunade gazed at her former teammate in disbelief. Who her godchild was evident, even obvious. Despite years of emotional hurt between them, only one person had ever asked, and she had never had the chance to say the loud, emphatic, yes, that had been on the back of her mind. Not to the most important person. Yes, she did recall that day. How Jiraiya, a happy, vivacious Jiraiya, had talked excitedly about their soon-to-be godson rather than even acting on his perverted instincts. How happy and thrilled Shizune had been at the prospect of going back to her birth village to see her elder sister figure. How they sensed something wasn't right as they got closer. How they were aware of the damage. What had happened was clear, and Jiraiya had yelled for his teammate to follow him as he ran into the village. However, she hadn't. Instead, with a sobbing Shizune at her heels, she had turned around and made a direct return trip in the opposite direction. Kushina had passed away, that much had been clear. Why? She muttered, and in that one, anguished word, so much emotion was expressed. Why? Jiraiya trailed off, staring pitifully at the floor. She had, since it was so clear, I was weak, Tsunade. I'm sure you've connected the dots by now. When there was an alternative, Minato and Kushina would never make another person's child shoulder the burden of being Jinchuriki. Their own. Oh, Kushina, she thought sorrowfully. While doing this, Jiraiya went on. Naruto has suffered terribly, because of his burden. He was shunned and reviled, although not to the violent extent some of his counterparts have had to deal with, thankfully. He's apparently quite a friendly child. All of his mother's ferocity and brashness, alongside his father's kindness and determination, he appeared pleased and sad. And Tsunade's throat became extremely dry all of a sudden, because she had previously lost a family member, an Uzumaki, due to her inability to face her own fears. And if she did it again, she would be damned. Particularly before she had the opportunity to meet him. What happened to him? With a wince, Jiraiya tried to avoid looking at his old teammate. Tsunade's hope was dashed when he finally acknowledged, he's in a coma. A coma? A coma? My godson is in a coma? That was a nasty surprise, wasn't it? Of all the ways, it was during his struggle for survival that she learned of his ongoing existence. Yes, she had lost a great number of her loved ones. Her parents, her brother and lover, her uncle, her great-uncle and grandparents, and her adorable but impoverished little cousin. Because despite everything Kiri had seen and lost, Kushina showed her such amazing kindness, even if Kiri and most of Konoha never saw it. Along with her parents, aunt, and maternal grandmother, she lost her entire village. Despite losing both her sensei, Nara Amiko, and her teammate, Hyuga Hisoka. Even so, she suffered greatly during the Third Shinobi World War while leading the Kirigakure front. Kushina had always been merciless to her enemies and gentle and understanding to her friends. It was during a mission, Jiraiya went on, as if unaware of his teammates' innermost feelings. The man chuckled a little when he said, a mission. Escalation, from C rank to A rank, probably recalling his own team's initial encounter with ranking adjustments. She became alert at once when he said, well, it would be better if nothing more was said here. Could we go somewhere I can set up some privacy seals? Given that he was a Jinchuriki, it was understandable that her godson was involved in some rather serious matters. Tsunade nodded as she guided the man to their present hotel room while reflecting on her predicament. She didn't like Konoha. Naturally, this wasn't always the case, but time had shown her that the Hidden Village's system was brutal and perfectly happy to deprive someone of everything they held dear. Tsunade had seen a great number of the people she cared about die, and she had heard about the rest from others. In order to care for the final member of her family, she had to swallow the pain she felt at the idea of approaching the village. The frightening thing was that she was genuinely unsure of her ability to succeed. 2 weeks ago, Hiruzen sighed sadly as he made his way to the Go Ikenban, Honored Opinion Watch, meeting room, dreading what lay ahead. He would have to update them on recent developments while emphasizing to them the significance of maintaining the S-rank secrecy that comes with the information. He'd thought about keeping the news to himself, but decided it was just easier to let the most powerful people in Konoha know what was going on, because if he didn't, they'd probably be bugging him all the time. After all, Team 7 was a very important team for the village. It was led by the last student of the Yondaime, Hadakunoichi, with a lot of unrealized potential, was the only surviving, loyal member of the Uchiha clan. Or so the village was led to believe, as well as the village's Jinchuriki and the boy who would eventually, hopefully, start a revived Uzumaki clan in Konoha. Given the Uzumaki's treatment in the village and the Uchiha's desire for power, it was a strong team with a lot of potential, but also a significant chance of defection. When Sarutobi finally entered the meeting room, he looked around at the people gathered and braced himself by determining who would probably cause the most trouble and who would cause the least. 1. Shikaku Nara. The Jonin commander of the entire village and the head of the Nara clan, though he was only there due to his position as the latter. Shoza Akamichi. Head of the Akamichi clan, and as such, his presence was allowed because of the noble status of his clan. In order to balance the Senju dominated Hokage seat with viewpoints from other clans, some elements had initially demanded more influence over village affairs than others when the village was first formed. The 4 clan heads who were, at the time, thought to be the most devoted to the village and the most likely to work for equitable outcomes for everyone had been selected in the end, but others, like the Inuzuka and Kurama clans, as well as smaller shinobi families that were hardly worth mentioning, had been left out. An empty seat, dedicated to the fallen Uchiha clan, stood next to Choza. Sasuke would be offered the seat upon his promotion to Jonin, but it remained vacant in the interim. Before his passing, Sasuke's father, the Uchiha clan head Fugaku, had previously occupied the position. Following Madara's defection, Fugaku's grandfather was elected as the Uchiha clan head, and he was initially given the seat. Shibi Aburame. The voice of the clan on the go. Ikenban is currently represented by the Aburame Ju, Aburame Queen. Since the Aburame Ju was extremely reclusive and had not been seen in the clan's entire history, both before and after Konoha's founding, the secretive Aburame chose a representative in contrast to the other clans. The Aburame's unexpected arrival more than a year after the village's founding and their request for nothing more than a seat on the go. Ikenban in return for their support of the village had probably been the most startling. Shibi, the current representative, was a successful clan member and the strongest shinobi the clan had produced while they were in the village. Consequently, he was dubbed the Pride of the Aburame, graduating from the academy a year ahead of schedule and joining a team with Uzumaki Kushina and Hyuga Hisoka. Shibi frequently represented reason and logic, which had a tendency to be a double-edged sword. Heishi Hyuga. The last head of the noble clans, and the head of the Hyuga clan. Unfortunately, the clan's situation had gotten worse over time, and a rather hostile force now held the council seat. Unfortunately, the clan had lived up to their noble status under their leader at the time of the village's founding, Hyuga Hiroshi, setting a brilliant example of the perfect shinobi for the rest of the village. Sarutobi was relieved that the clan had recently played a relatively small part in village politics. After the Hyuga incident, the clan appeared to be more focused on internal affairs, but he didn't like how isolated they appeared to be from the rest of the village. He was almost reminded of the Uchiha clan, but in this instance, the clan's separation from the village was completely their own doing. Only Hiruzen knows the Anbu commander as simply Dancho, commander of the Legion, 2. The man's only distinguishing features were his short, spiky light brown hair and below average height, aside from the dog-shaped mask he wore over his face, complete with pointy ears. He appeared completely unremarkable. But the tenseness in the figure's form and the danger the man radiated marred this image. Anyone with a semblance of intelligence could see that this man was death personified. Homura Mitokado. Homura, Sarutobi's former teammate under the Nidaime Hokage, was somewhat more conceited and much more militant than the Sandaime. The glasses-wearing man, who was inclined to agree with Danzo on issues pertaining to village security, frequently opposed Naruto, seeing the boy as nothing more than the village's Jinchuriki and a possible source of a new, repopulated Senju clan and Uzumaki in Konoha. As a executive advisor, he was also highly respected in the village. Homura, in contrast to the others, posed a real danger to Hiruzen's hold on the entire Konoha shinobi population. Kaharu Utatane. Hiruzen and Homura's female teammate, who completed the group of Tobirama's students, was the more modest of the two but equally militant. In any case, she was another executive advisor, and a strong advocate of Danzo and his policies. She was well known and a threat in the village, even though she didn't have quite the same respect as Homura. Ibiki Morino. The current head of Konoha's torture and interrogation department is a Tokubetsu Jonin. Due to his past experiences as the victim of his own profession, particularly on a rather perilous mission to Kumogakure during the last war that went awry, the man was severely scarred. Fortunately, the man had shown himself to be very resistant to torture, and upon his escape and return to the village, he had been drafted right away into Konoha's T&I department. Akira Koyanagi. Naturally, the green-eyed man's presence made sense as the head of Konoha's hospital. Taking into account both of his terms, he had actually been head of Konoha Hospital for a few fewer years than Hiruzen had been Hokage. Chiko Kaneshiro. A rather dim, forgetful woman wearing an ornate black kimono with an imperial headdress, with brown hair and light brown eyes, a round face, and rounded eyes set on a pale complexion. Despite being the youngest daughter and representative of the daimyo in Konohagakure, Chiko was largely disregarded at Ikenban meetings. It had been a rule since the establishment of Konoha that the daimyo had the authority to designate a liaison to attend Ikenban meetings. This law had occasionally been applied with disastrous results during her grandfather's reign, when Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire's civilian leadership had a respectable army of its own. Fortunately, the present daimyo and his offspring lacked even a small portion of their predecessor's guile, and as a result, they were largely unaware of the extent of their supposed authority in the village. Hiruzen would sooner have the entire regime overthrown than give them control of Konoha, even if they found out. Naturally, it was crucial to keep in mind that the Go Ikenban was only there to offer guidance and get things done. In reality, they had very little authority over the village and were mainly responsible for making sure the Hokage's wishes were carried out, regardless of what the people in the village believed. Of course, Homura and Kaharu, the leaders of the Go Ikenban, had more influence because of their more active role in advising the Hokage as well as their notoriety in the village as Tobirama's pupils and loyal Konoha shinobi. Although they were not officially on par with the Hokage in terms of political power, the executive members of the Go Ikenban, there could never be more than 3 of them at once, were fully capable of undermining the Hokage's rule if they didn't agree with it. Then, in order to prevent another incident, Sarutobi had to make sure they approved of the choices he made. Hiruzen said simply, "I hereby call the 4th meeting of the Go Ikenban, in year 61 PWS, to order," and everyone in attendance went back to their seats. 3. Kaharu said, "Hokage Sama," and the Sandaime nearly let out a sigh. "So it starts. I recently heard a rumor that Uzumaki Naruto was brought into the Konoha hospital by his sensei, Comatose. Would there be any truth to this?" All of the Go Ikenban's eyes suddenly turned to their leader, who appeared to grow older before their very eyes. He said, "I am afraid it is true, Kaharu," as he observed the woman's slight paleness. Even though he hadn't lived up to her expectations thus far, she was one of the few people in the village who had high expectations for the village outcast. Since her sister had taken Minato and after his parents passed away, Kaharu was familiar with both Kushina and Minato. After a moment of confusion, the daimyo's daughter gasped. The woman raised an inquisitive eyebrow around the room and asked, "The village's Jinchuriki?" As the Go Ikenban exchanged glances, Shibi gave the woman a nod of affirmation. Heishi said plainly, "This is not good," and everyone else in the room nodded. "How exactly did this come to pass, Hokage Sama?" The Hokage scowled and said, "It seems that Team 7's first C-rank mission experienced a ranking change." Hiruzen shook his head and sighed, "I'm afraid that Naruto's first experience drawing on the Kyuubi's chakra has not been without consequence." The professor quickly elaborated on his remark at the shocked gasps heard throughout the room. "Truly, I'm shocked that the mission to Nami no Kuni managed to get through the system. It's not as if we were unaware of Gado's rule over the nation. However, thanks to the actions of Team 7 and Naruto in particular, we have probably secured Nami as a trade ally for years to come. The Kyuubi seems to have drawn out the latent abilities in Naruto Kun's DNA." The Anbu commander asked in a monotone, his mask tilting to the side in inquiry. "Latent abilities?" "Indeed," Koinagi said abruptly, beaming wildly. "All latent abilities within 3 generations of Naruto Kun's ancestry have been drawn out. Of course, the Uzumaki chakra has had a smothering effect to an extent, leaving Naruto with only the chakra natures of his Uzumaki ancestors alongside the Kongo Fusa adamantine sealing chains, but due to the presence of Uchiha ancestors on both sides of his family, he's unlocked the Sharingan as well. Truly, I'm still wondering how the Kyuubi managed it." Hiruzen gave a loud "what?" and violently suppressed the urge to facepalm. Reverberated in the space. Kaharu said, "How is this? The Kusari chains? Really? Why, this is marvelous." And the normally calm woman's smile turned startlingly bright. "We'd thought the Kongo Fusa to have finally died out. Who'd have thought that Bakagitsune, Monster Fox, would do us a favor?" "Indeed," Homura said, although he appeared much more composed than his opponent. Homura sighed in response to Koinagi's one melancholy headshake. "This is great news, although I will admit I am concerned as to how the Kyuubi managed it." "You say you are still unsure of this?" he asked. "Regardless, I find myself wondering as to how Naruto-san possessed the DNA for the Sharingan. As you don't seem shocked, would you care to explain, Hiruzen?" The Sandaime sighed and then began to explain Minato's parents in the same way that he had explained them to Kakashi and Jiraiya, adding details about Mito's lover and her connection to Kushina. Unfortunately, they were still unable to identify Mito's lover because they had not had time to question Mito Sama before she passed out, and there was no guarantee that the Uchiha was even one of Konoha's former shinobi. Which makes me think. It also appears that Naruto-kun has received echoes of Mito Sama and Kushina alongside large portions of their chakra levels, leaving him with their memories and chakra signatures, although the merging of those with Naruto's own will be a slow process, thankfully. Otherwise Naruto would be unlikely to survive the process. Indeed, Akira hummed, leaning back in his chair with his arms cradling the back of his head, his green eyes hidden behind closed eyelids. I believe that Naruto.kun will be fully integrated with Kushina-chan's Echo, which, understandably, is smaller than Mito Sama's, since she died at a much younger age, and had less chakra. About a little under 2 years from now, whereas it will take 4 for Mito Sama's to integrate. The process will be difficult and painful, although I'm hoping Tsunade may be able to help me limit it to his subconscious mind, so that it integrates while he's asleep or resting. This would need a combined effort of Iryo, ninjutsu and fuinjutsu, however. Overcoming the growing commotion in the room after the latest revelation, Shikaku abruptly interrupted, "Tsunade? Is she returning to the village, then?" At his remark, every Ikanban member appeared to get excited. With a brief nod, Hiruzen put an end to the growing excitement with his subsequent statement. "We're hoping so. Jiraiya has gone to speak with her, and since Naruto is both her blood relative and godson, we're hoping for a positive outcome. If she doesn't, Naruto may very well never recover." Today the blonde started, so, Jiraiya, after the three of them had returned to the hotel room and the privacy seals had been added, explain. With a sigh and a sorrowful shake of his head, the white-haired Sannin looked up into the eyes of his old teammate. Jiraiya winced at this point, and Tsunade realized what was about to happen. "After you turned around and left, I decided to go straight to Sensei, and he told me what had happened," she said. "They were both dead." Yes, she was aware. She knew all these years, it was clear. She had cried, grieved, and used gambling and sake to numb her pain. To forget, she took a drink. She was sitting on the couch with a redhead who was beaming and talking excitedly about Minato.kun, who had saved her from those Kumo.nin, and was so cool. Tsunade nodded and grinned, regretting her absence at the moment. After returning from her 4th C-rank mission with a dead teammate and only an emotionless lump of an Aburame as possible support, she drank to forget a little girl crying in her arms. To forget her own tears when she learned of a young girl, now a full-fledged kunoichi, who had just been promoted to Genin and was lying in the hospital, half dead, and she was unable to visit her. To forget a heated argument that descended into violence and the anger blazing in one of her remaining loved one's eyes. Trying to forget that poor, sweet, dead girl had taken up so much of her time. To disregard the reality that, like so many others, one of the lights in her life had been completely extinguished. However, hearing the words out loud, "How?" she said abruptly, her voice hollow and raspy, her throat extremely dry. "How did she die?" Jiraiya laughed, but there was absolutely no humor in the sound. He cried out abruptly, "She survived. She actually." Ha! Kushina was truly made of sterner stuff. Before his expression returned to its seriousness at the soiled look Tsunade was giving him. "Sorry, it's just, she actually survived. She survived Biju extraction, although an autopsy revealed that her coils were so damaged that she'd have likely died anyway, or at least been mostly unable to mold chakra." The two women let out loud gasps. Biju extraction was a nasty fate, after all, and it would be extremely painful to suffer such severe damage to the chakra circulatory system. Once more, the room echoed softly at the sound of twin gasps. Anyway, Kushina bound the Kyubi with her Kongo Fusa, and Minato used the Shikifujin, dead demon-consuming seal, to seal half of it away, but apparently the damned fox had enough slack to try to impale Naruto. Jiraiya hurried to Tsunade's aid upon noticing her wide-eyed horror. "Don't worry. They managed to stop it in time. Well, according to Sensei, who was beyond the barrier Kushina and Minato erected to contain the Kyubi, they were impaled on its claws, using their bodies to shield him." Tsunade broke down in heartbreaking sobs, unable to control her emotions any longer. 2 weeks ago, after a few more minutes of discussion, Homura interrupted, asking, "What about his teammates?" He explained, "The bond of a team, especially a Genin team, is a strong one. Are we to jeopardize the bond of what may become Konoha's frontline team?" The elderly shinobi might have been taken by surprise if he hadn't been thinking about the topic for too long. "Don't worry," the Sandaime finally said, grimly addressing his former teammate's eyes. "While still in the planning stages, I'm currently coming up with a strategy on how to deal with Naruto's placement on Team 7. Once I've fully detailed the plan, I'll inform you all at the meeting following it. Likely our next one." That was sufficient, as it happened, and Homura nodded. A sigh of relief, too faint to reach the wrong ears, was released by the shinobi no Kami, god of shinobi, as he leaned back in his chair a little. That worked out well, he thought, suppressing another sigh. It could have gone a lot worse. Shibi calmly interrupted, Hokage. Sama, and Sarutobi's blood froze. When the Aburame representative did speak up during such a period, it was typically to propose something that was rational but completely cruel. That was how the bug. Using clan was sometimes. I propose Naruto.san be placed under the Kree. 4. No. Hiruzen scolded right away. Yes, he was aware of that law. The so-called clan repopulation initiative was actually a glorified form of sex slavery, and it was one of his late sensei's worst errors. The idea behind the law was that a member of a new clan with a keke genke or a member of an old clan that had declined in numbers for some reason was either gifted a harem for breeding or forced to become pregnant with the sperm of several men, depending on their gender. It was a harsh law, and the Ikenban and Hokage selected any females for the male clan members' harem. The women were essentially reduced to glorified baby farms with no say in the matter. Although there were rumors among Danzo, Homura, and Kaharu that they would push for Sasuke and Naruto to be placed under it as they grew older, it had never been implemented in Konoha's history. Staring at his former teammate incredulously, Homura demanded, why not? If the Kongo Fusa and Sharingan have emerged in the boy, especially when he has also had Uzumaki DNA and chakra drawn out, then it is possible that they have evolved past the Uzumaki clan's notorious chakra. If that's true, then he may very well be capable of passing the Sharingan on, and of passing the Kusari on to more than one of his descendants. Hiruzen, this is a miracle for the village and I will not permit you to waste it. Hiruzen snapped, momentarily losing his temper. I absolutely refuse to allow that abomination of a law to be enacted. They said. Since genuine couples who genuinely cared for one another were being torn apart on a daily basis by their lifestyle and mortality, it sickened him that the village he led and fought for could possibly force its own women into loveless relationships. It was unacceptable to him. Choza said, I agree with Hokage Sama, which helped to defuse the situation. Even though Sarutobi was grinning appreciatively at him, he actually received half of the unhappiness directed at him. The head of the Akamichi clan went on. To their credit, Kaharu and Chiko both appeared to be deeply chastised. The clan repopulation initiative is a disgusting blight on Konoha. An injustice that no young woman could possibly deserve. To condemn one of our citizens to such a union is nothing short of cruel and unnecessary, and I shall not stand for it, he concluded. After attracting attention to himself with a contemplative hum, Shikaku snapped his fingers and looked around the room before focusing on Shibi. As soon as he said, I propose a compromise, the whole room became tense. Although Inara's compromise was a very well considered and clever solution, it was never quite what anyone wanted. Usually, it meant that they would all probably be somewhat let down. Hiruzen cautiously said, oh, already considering how to refute whatever the man proposed. Shikaku was generally a very good man, but his position as Jonin commander had made him a tough guy who was prepared to accept decisions that he thought were morally dubious, as long as they helped the village as a whole. He was no longer the slothful little Genin trained by the sister of the Sandame. Indeed, said the commander of the Jonin. I propose that Uzumaki Naruto and Uchiha Sasuke be given requirements for the revival of their clans. Both are to have 3 children, with willing partners, by the time they reach the age of 25. Furthermore, they are to have 6 by the age of 35, and if they fail to achieve these restrictions, then they are to be placed under the CRA until they have fathered at least 8 children. If, in Uzumaki-san's case, he fails to pass along the Kusari gene to any of his children, he is to continue producing heirs until he has done so. After this point, the CRA will have no bearing on their lives, and they are free to continue their lives as they see fit. Furthermore, no more would be required of the women, assisting the Uchiha and Uzumaki in reviving their respective clans after the quota of children was reached. Unwillingly, Sarutobi had to concede that it was a good plan. The meeting proceeded to other subjects following a round of assent. An hour or so later, a tired Sandame walked slowly back to his office with the intention of completing the few papers left for the day before leaving for home. I hope that when he returns, Konohamaru won't have another trick up his sleeve. At times, he sincerely regretted the day his grandson had first encountered Uzumaki Naruto. Hiruzen looked out over his village, considering what to do. Undoubtedly, his plan was risky, but it might just work out. Their interactions during the academy prevented them from forming strong bonds early on, which was crucial for the next generation. The man abruptly snapped his fingers as he made up his mind. At the silent order, an Anbu agent materialized before him, kneeling and bowing their head. He merely ordered, bring me Sarutobi Asuma. Yuhi Kurenai, and Hitaki Kakashi, and the agent proceeded into the village to finish their task. He could gamble, just like his only female pupil, but he didn't want to lose like she did. Today Tsunade finally managed to pull herself away from her recollections of the past, of that dazzling glimmer of joy in her life that had long been out of reach and extinguished, as Shizune held her while she sobbed. Jiraiya was standing across from her, looking unusually solemn and sadly at the slug summoner. Shizune was still sobbing in private, her arms trembling with a sob now and then as she kept them close to her mentor. Tsunade sat up a little and put an arm around her grieving apprentice's shoulders. She sniffed and looked into her teammate's eyes. She asked plainly, how'd they treat him? And Jiraiya understood. He would understand, of course, since they had both heard stories about Jinchuriki, had fought against them in the past, and were aware of how they were typically treated. Additionally, Sarutobi would have needed to reveal the Biju's fate in order to reassure the public that it had been vanquished. A Jinchuriki was a reasonable conclusion, and their sensei might have even been coerced into disclosing the Jinchuriki's name in order to allay public anxieties. Furthermore, in an attempt to emphasize the village's power, the Go Ikenban had been pushing for decades for the name of Konoha's Jinchuriki to be made public. Tsunade felt her stomach turn unpleasantly, and Jiraiya winced. He said, compared to the Jinchuriki of the other nations? And Shizune, who had not yet connected the dots to form a misshapen four, gasped in surprise. Disregarding her, he continued, fairly well, to be honest. He was segregated for his entire life, neglected by some at the orphanage, but for the most part he's fine. Compared to what I've heard of the current Ichibi and Nanabi Jinchuriki, both of whom are around Naruto's age, he's had it very easy. Regardless, Inoichi theorizes that he's repressed a lot of memories and emotions in his life, and there have been a few incidences of violence. As his teammates' face darkened, they've all been dealt with using the force deserving of their transgression, and in the case of one of them, a public execution. Jiraiya made the abrupt decision that he had never experienced true terror. At his words, Tsunade's face lit up with a look of vindictive glee that was eerie. With her emotions under control once more, Shizune asked, what exactly has happened to him? You said he's in a coma, but… Ah, yes, Jiraiya said, nodding to the woman with the black hair before letting out a sorrowful sigh. The Kyuubi has modified his DNA, drawing out latent bloodlines. The Kongo Fusa and the Sharingan. Shizune and Tsunade both felt weak. They knew that such tasks were supposedly impossible because they were medical professionals. Tsunade in particular, as Orochimaru had occasionally bounced ideas off her regarding how to bring out latent talent. It would be extremely difficult to make such changes, and it would require access to the developing child, which the Kyuubi obviously had, as well as some kind of chakra or genetic material from both sides of the ancestry. It would also need to start at a very young age and be painful at times, particularly when unlocking the ability for the first time. Orochimaru had been certain of that. Naruto would undoubtedly have endured a great deal of suffering during the encounter. Tsunade's stomach swelled with dread as she asked abruptly, wait, the Sharingan? No, they have no way of knowing about. Jiraiya gave his teammate a nod in response to his expression. He trailed off, looking at his teammate thoughtfully. Yes, it seems that Naruto has Uchiha DNA. I'm told that there is a conversation regarding this that you would remember. She remembered, too. She recalls being approached by her grandmother, who was greatly aging due to the influence of the seal that allowed her to heal quickly enough for an adult to survive pulling a Biju into themselves. Tsunade eventually refined this seal into what is now her Byakugo no In, strength of 100 seal, and she was asked to compare Mito and Kushina's DNA. And she was completely unprepared for the outcome. When Tsunade finally said, Yi. Yes, she sighed and then her eyes narrowed. How did you know that? Jiraiya sighed as well, leaning back in his chair and putting his hands behind his head. He paused here, expecting a loud gasp from Shizune, but got none. It seems that a form of echo of Kushina and your grandmother remained with the Kyuubi after its extraction. He snorted inwardly. Figures. Tsunade shares almost everything with Shizune. She knows that Kushina and Mito were Jinchuriki, so it's not surprising, he said, shaking his head. The Kyuubi also pulled those presences forward to aid in the modification of Naruto's body. In effect, he has all of Mito and Kushina's skills and memories. As the younger woman choked on oxygen, Tsunade gazed at her former teammate with wide eyes, hardly noticing her own arm patting her apprentice on the back. Kushina. Chan's. The Mito. Bachan's, dear word. Given how Naruto obtained the Kusari, it made sense. Naturally, it was determined to remove any possibility of the Sharingan from Kushina's body following the DNA test that Tsunade and her grandmother had performed. She had to acknowledge that she still didn't know the identity of her grandmother's mystery lover, but even for Uchiha, he must have had strong chakra if his genes had appeared in his descendant. Otherwise, the infamously powerful chakra of the Uzumaki clan, which would have grown more powerful with these occurrences, would have overwhelmed the DNA. She was aware of the reason for her call because she had previously dealt with instances of memory integration issues. Even as a young girl, Tsunade and her mother had become legendary for their involvement in Mito's attempts to help Yamanaka clan members who had not properly integrated memories. In order to effectively contain and seal the memories of previous mind-walking experiences that contained memories that were completely too dangerous to remain in a shinobi's mind, Mito had developed a seal. Events like torture, rape, or secret intelligence left a mark on the soul, and even testifying would have an adverse effect on someone. The seal was still a potent technique that only Tsunade knew how to use, even though it had become obsolete after the Yamanaka discovered a new method of doing this themselves. A method for healing and sealing off memory-related mental trauma, either for integration or removal. Furthermore, it was Kushina and Mito.ba's memories, not just anyone else's. Tsunade's daughter, Kushina, had been somewhere between a cousin and a daughter. Kushina, who gave her life to defend the people she cared about. Her only child's godmother is Kushina, who gave her the name Tsunade. Due to the actions of a meddling fox who had been ruining Tsunade's family's life for years, Kushina's son was currently unconscious. It and its vengeful kin. For now, she doesn't need to hear anything more. She certainly had questions, and she certainly wanted answers. But once they got there, those could be resolved. Tsunade sighed after saying, "Well then, for a long time, I suppose we're going to Konoha." Jiraiya blinked. Then he smiled. Another memory from Kushina's point of view came to Naruto. Quickly dodging to the left, Kushina raised her sword in her arm and cleaved the Kiri Nin's arm cleanly off. They formed two chains from her back and then struck and impaled two Kirigakure Jonin targets around her. In a unique move influenced by her former Hyuga clan teammate, she spun, forming two more Kongo Fusa and using Kaden natured chakra to force them. She then decapitated one Kiri.Nin and seriously injured four more that were in her path. Hey, don't undervalue me, Kiri scum. The idea of killing Kirigakure shinobi filled her with a vindictive glee as usual. Who knows, perhaps among those in attendance were those who had participated in Uzushio's fall. She could keep exacting revenge on those who killed her kin. Defectors from the Roku no Hagakoku, Protectorate of Six, might have even been present. Just as the blade Shibuki, splash, landed on her position, a shadow suddenly moved past her, and Kushina ducked to the right, causing the area she had been in a moment before to rock with an explosion. Kushina's Anbu mask broke, and she quickly lowered her head to shield her face from any flying debris. As it was, she had a few scratches on her face, which would probably go away in a day or two. God, sometimes I love being an Uzumaki Jinchuriki. Munashi Jinpachi smiled lustfully across from her. The man's bloodlust filled the air around him as he said, "It'll be a great shame to kill such a beautiful specimen. Pity Mizukage. Sama only wants your head, Kusari. Takeyatsu, Chain Cyclone." Kushina did not answer, but instead leapt at the man, bringing her blade down in an arc powered by Kaden. He raised his blade to parry the attack, but the Kiri.Nin ducked slightly to the right in response. But Shibuki's groaning, scraping sound after being struck was not encouraging. At the point of impact, neither dent was visible. Jinpachi's mouth was practically foaming. He yelled, "You bitch," as he spun Shibuki and used the many explosive tags on the blade. They all exploded in a huge explosion that sent Kushina flying. Kushina had created a Kage Bunshin shadow clone at the last minute to throw her away. She quickly recovered and jumped back to meet him, trying to impale him while forming a Kongo Fusa. However, her efforts were unsuccessful because he skillfully sidestepped each chain attack, and eventually the chain got so far away from her that she had to let go of the technique. Jinpachi unleashed a Suiten Mazurapa, water release, water trumpet, in an attempt to hit Kushina in the head as she raced back towards him and swung her sword to strike, forcing her to dodge. Kushina swung her blade at the A-ranked shinobi after avoiding the technique. He chose to dodge rather than parry, recalling the damage done to his Shibuki the last time. For several minutes, the two Kenjutsu practitioners kept dancing while exchanging blows and ninjutsu. Despite Jinpachi's constant efforts to avoid parrying, Kushina's superior katana still occasionally struck his blade with glances. The weapon's frame was lined with 3 dents, one of which was on the sharpened length of metal across from the explosive tag reels. Even Kushina had some injuries. She had a cut on her right arm and numerous bruises on her left side. Likewise, where Jinpachi had strained against the kusari that Kushina had once used to bind him, his shins were bloodied. Instead of joining the conflict between the two strong nin, all of the nearby shinobi engaged in their own conflicts. Kushina struggled to remind herself that this foul-mouthed idiot was actually the Kirigakure no Nikuya, Butcher of the Hidden Mist, an extremely dangerous A-ranked ninja. Jinpachi taunted, "You know, I'm glad we finally got a look at you, stupid bitch. We've spent so long trying to figure out what the fuck you look like, and finally here you are." Really, that was understandable. The Sandame had put Kushina under close observation following the incident with Kumo, preventing any information about her from leaving the village. Shortly after achieving Jonin status, she joined the Anbu and gained notoriety for never revealing her face while fighting in a mask. The cover had flaws, of course, because there were no other Uzumaki in Konoha except herself, but Jiraiya used his spy network to suppress any rumors that left the village, so outside of Konoha, Kushina's identity was mostly unknown. Rather, she was Chain Cyclone of the Leaf, Konoha no Kusari. Takeyatsu. She sneered, "Well, I always knew to look out for your ugly mug, Nikuya," and relished the menacing growl she got in return. Jinpachi tried to cut her head in two by leaping at her and swinging Shibuki down sharp. Side first. Kushina ducked quickly, dragging her away with her Kongo Fusa. Kushina intonated the name of her technique as she twisted to the right and placed her hand against Jinpachi's side. Fuinjutsu. Chakra Bando, Sealing Art. Chakra Bind. Jinpachi was taken aback by the abruptness of the attack and his instantaneous lack of chakra control, and she struck at that precise moment. Jinpachi dodged as she anticipated, but not fast enough, and Kushina swung her blade around in a slash without bothering to coat it with Kaden chakra because that would negate the blade's natural poisons. The left side of Jinpachi's face was struck by Kushina's blade, which cut a bloody swath across his skin where his eye had been. Two Kiri.Nin swooped down and seized him by the shoulders as he let out a cry of agony. As his subordinates carried him and his blade away, Jinpachi growled, "You'll regret this, you and your kindred." But before Kushina could follow him and finish the task, a second figure with the blade Haramekure landed on the ground in front of her. A man with a pale, slender face, spiky red hair, and cold black eyes. Kazuhiko Uzumaki. A week and a half earlier, as he gazed at the gathered, quarreling Genin, Hiruzen let out a sorrowful sigh, which has become a recent habit. Shikamaru Nara. Like so many of his clansmen, he was a lazy genius and the heir to the Nara clan. With the exception of his mother Yoshino's genes softening his features, the boy was essentially a younger clone of his father. Almost certainly going to succeed in his current adventure, and the only one, at that. Ino Yamanaka. Perhaps the most nonchalant kunoichi in the area, this heiress to the Yamanaka clan has an odd love for working with plants. Being Inoichi's daughter, she probably had a tendency toward T&I as well, but it might have been a little too soon to think of that as her future. She was also one of his riskier bets, but if handled properly, she might be a good one. Shoji Akamichi. The Akamichi clan's heir and possibly the epitome of the clan's culinary customs. Despite having serious problems with self-esteem, the boy had inherited his ancestors' amazing kindness. He would probably turn out to be one of the group's safest bets because he was one of the few people in the academy who had at least a passing acquaintance with Naruto. Kiba Inuzuka. With the exception of clan training and a loving family, the boy is quite brash and similar to Naruto. One of the closest things to a friend Naruto had managed to make in the academy, though undoubtedly not the smartest. As a shinobi of the Inuzuka clan, he was naturally loyal, and as the only nephew of the clan head, he would become fairly influential within the clan. He was another risk, and possibly not the most valuable one. In any case, he was required because he belonged to the next generation. Hinata Hyuga. The Hyuga clan's heiress and possibly their best chance. Or the branch family's hope, anyway. Hinata was extremely shy and timid, but she possessed a rare kindness and empathy in a clan where such things were practically heretical, especially by her own parents and grandparents. Naturally, he was aware of the rumors circulating within the clan, which claimed that the girl's branding with the Hyuga Soke no Juinjutsu, the Juinjutsu of the Hyuga main family, was only being prevented by Hiyoshi's rapidly waning goodwill. Though Sarutobi couldn't be certain, she had a soft spot for Naruto, which should make her one of the safer bets among the gathered genin. Shino Aburame. He was the son of the Aburame Jews representative, but there was no clear sign that he was as talented as his father. Like the rest of his clan, Shino was a quiet, stoic person who was unlikely to cause any problems in this endeavor because of his almost perfect reasoning. Sakura Haruno. Despite having relatively low chakra reserves, this young kunoichi possessed what may have been the best chakra control in the village since Tsunade herself. She was right in the middle of her academy class, with a strong mental component but a weak physical component. When she was older, with the right training, she could be a dangerous medic.nin and genjutsu user. In addition to being one of the group's biggest risks, she was also one of the highest paying, should he be successful. Sasuke Uchiha. The alleged final devoted Uchiha. The strongest in his class in terms of jutsu and sheer chakra. The Sandaime had been forced to put such plans on hold for a while after it became apparent that the young Uchiha's mental state had changed. The boy's father had been working on plans to have the raven-haired preteen graduate the academy early when the man passed away. Surprisingly, because of his distant relationship with the blonde, Sasuke was one of his least dangerous planned bets. Sarutobi let out a sigh. He was engaging kids in political games. What had happened to the world? Hiruzen was able to identify the chakras of the three sensei of each team, Yuhi Kurenai, Hitaki Kakashi, and his own son Asuma, in the tree line. Although the Hokage knew that the latter, and particularly the former of the three, did not generally approve of the village Jinchuriki, they were generally not much of a gamble. Ultimately, Asuma was deeply in love with Kurenai, and the kunoichi were reluctant to interact with the blonde, particularly after her brother Arashi, the last member of her family, had been publicly executed for attacking the blonde in broad daylight. And without the prompt action of his old friend Kagami's descendant, it would have ended considerably worse than it did. The Sandaime grinned a little at the sight of the gathered genin and used a basic shunshin, body flicker, to emerge in front of them. They will be fantastic. Sakura cried out, Hokage. Sama, and stood up, bowing to the man. The rest of the next generation soon followed. The man said softly, "Ah, Sakura. Chan," and the girl flushed at being observed by the renowned shinobi. He went on, speaking to the entire group, "You may be at ease," and they did so cautiously and slowly. In any case, a minute stirring was now present in their young forms, and Hiruzen suppressed the attempts of his smile to develop into a broad grin. "Great indeed. I have called you all here today to discuss the missing member of your graduating class." The ecstatic Inuzuka interrupted, "Oh, that's right," as he looked around for the missing blonde, his eyes bright with sudden insight. The brunette continued, avoiding the Yamanaka's swat at the back of his head as she complained about troublesome, disrespectful mutts, and then muttering in horror about turning into Shika. "Where is that baka? Anyway?" "Sleeping in, I guess," he said arrogantly, utterly oblivious to the scowls he was receiving from the Jinchuriki's teammates. "Naruto is in a coma," Hiruzen interrupted, swiftly stopping the genin's muffled chatter. Once more, he was the center of attention, even though everyone else appeared to be a little engrossed in their own shock. The shinobi no Kami kept moving forward, hoping his gamble would be successful. Team 7 was sent on a mission that was incorrectly ranked. Throughout the mission, Naruto was influenced and has fallen into a coma. Currently, his godmother is being called back to the village so that he can be treated. The quiet Hyuga heiress said, Anyo, Hokage. Sama, as she peered up from under her blue-black bangs to look at the man inquisitively. He nodded, and she plucked up the courage to go on. Her question was straightforward. "I thought Naruto.kun grew up alone, Hokage. Sama, S.So. W. Why did his godmother not return sooner, to raise him?" Hiruzen didn't like the response. The preteens all looked at their leader with sudden interest, and he grimaced, the lines around his face getting deeper. His words were laced with sincere sorrow. Naruto Kun's godmother lost much throughout her life, as did his godfather, he answered. It's not totally accurate. He questioned whether Tsunade even knew Naruto was still alive. I think the loss of Naruto's parents was what finally drove them off the edge. They had both lost very much, especially during the previous Shinobi World Wars, and to lose those two as well. I think they couldn't deal with the reminder. When she had so voluntarily left the village, he had never been able to bring himself to call her again. This is especially true given that she was only a few meters from the gates when she turned around and departed once more. For a long time, he believed Naruto should not have to deal with such a dysfunctional pair of guardians. Admittedly, a minor portion of it was the requirement that the Jinchuriki of the village stay wholly local and devoted. Tsunade's tendency toward disobedience might have made him completely untrustworthy. The Yamanaka heiress abruptly interrupted, "That's cowardly," and everyone's attention was focused on her. She was looking resolutely at her leader and didn't appear to notice. The blonde was becoming increasingly heated in her argument, and Hiruzen was on the verge of declaring that he already had her. It's hardly fair to anyone to ignore them, simply because they bring up bad memories. Especially a child left in your care. Next up, the others. He readily agreed, indeed it is, even though it was also understandable. The majority of his students' close friends and family had passed away. After his parents passed away, he frequently pondered what might have happened if he or someone else had been able to fill the void in Orochimaru's life. But regardless, it is how it is. What I need to speak to you all about is something slightly different. Sarutobi gave a small nod in response to Nara Shikamaru's raised hand, anticipating the boy's next question. He asked, Hokage. Sama, you mentioned that Naruto was influenced? And the other Genin's eyes widened as they realized the crucial detail they had overlooked. Bar Shibi's son, that is. The Sandaime had a suspicion that the boy had just not yet had the time to mention it. Hiruzen hummed softly and nodded before sealing his hand. A cage bunshin appeared beside him. Hiruzen took a scroll out of his robes instantly. He asked simply, what is this? And knew without verifying that the Haruno girl was the first to rise. Yes, Sakura-chan? That's a scroll, Hokage. Sama, she pointed to the item. In general, they're used as simple storage devices, but skilled Fuinjutsu users are capable of using them for other things, such as sealing chakra or placing summoning matrices on them. He replied, that's correct, Sakura-chan, and gave the bunshin the order to start the demonstration. The bunshin released a Kaden. Karyu Enden, fire release. Fire Dragon Bullet. At the original, both of them taking a small step to the side. Sarutobi made a single hand seal and opened the scroll, ignoring the Genin's gasps at the high-level technique. The attack was neatly absorbed into the ready-made scroll, completely disappearing as the bunshin scattered. He walked back to the Genin and held up the scroll, ensuring that they could see the sealing matrix that had been placed on its surface. And now? He asked simply, looking around at the gathered preteens to see how they were responding. A scroll with a Kaden ninjutsu sealed inside of it, Hokage. Sama, the boy from Aburame said. Hiruzen decided to raise an eyebrow instead of scowling. The Sandaime asked, and does that make it any less of a scroll, Shino-kun? Of course not, Hokage. Sama, Shino said, submitting with a nod. Hiruzen smiled triumphantly, but only inwardly. Why? Because being a scroll is inherent to its nature, and cannot be changed, regardless of the strength of that contained within. Although, the Aburame continued, briefly appearing to reflect. It does increase the scroll's potential for battle, but besides that, it changes nothing. As he considered his gamble once more, Hiruzen scowled as he prepared to reveal his next shocking revelation. Well, nothing gained, nothing ventured. What? He said, looking directly into the eyes of the entire next generation, if the same could be said of people. As she stepped through the doorway into Konohagakure, Tsunade shivered a little, fiercely suppressing the disgust and rage that boiled inside of her. Even though she no longer lived here, she would still deal with it because it was the home of her godson and her departed family. It was. Konoha is different. Although the village's layout had changed, possibly as a result of the damage the Kyuubi caused during its attack, it was still recognizable as the location where she had fled 21 years earlier. It was a place her grandfather had constructed, her grandfather's guardian, her sensei, her parents, brother, and lover had fought for and sacrificed their lives for. The location of the deaths of several of her loved ones, including her mother, grandmother, and cousin. Tsunade shuddered once more. With a glare and a flick enhanced by chakra that made the toad sage wince, she rejected Jiraiya's attempt to comfort her by lifting an arm to rub her back. But he smiled and quickly shrugged it off. Come on, we better get to Sensei's office, to see our godson, he yelled. Tsunade covered the idiot's mouth with a clamped hand. Herzing, quiet, you baka, are you trying to paint a target on his back? Tsunade wasn't going to take any chances, even though they had so far gone largely undetected, probably because the Anbu squad behind them had cast a powerful genjutsu around them. She was excited to go to the hospital and take care of Naruto after being fully informed about everything that had happened to him. Shizune buzzed with anticipation behind her. The girl remembered the Uzumaki woman with affection, even though she had not spent much time with Tsunade and Kushina before the former left Konoha. For Kushina, seeing her son had always been a dream. In any case, Shizune would have to wait outside the office while Sarutobi used strong Fuinjutsu to seal it off. When called, the two Sannin opened the Sandaime's office door a short while later. Tsunade had jumped in front of Jiraiya and kicked him back down to the street when he attempted to enter through the window. He had quickly changed direction. The Sandaime, old hat and all, sat in front of them behind the desk in the large, circular office that had been partially rebuilt after the Kyuubi attacked the village and caused extensive damage to the building. He grinned as he looked up at them both. Tsunade. Heim. It is good to see you again, he replied. He glanced. Elderly. Not possible. Her grandmother could have been just a few years older than the man in front of her, but she had aged considerably after sealing the Kyuubi within herself. For Shinobi no Kami, god of shinobi, the years had not been kind. She could still sense it, though. The power of his chakra, the fierce sparkle in his eyes, even though they were both dulled and less noticeable than when she had last seen him more than 20 years ago. Like the rest of their team, he appeared exhausted, but she could also see the rage that was always burning inside of him, a bitter, all-consuming rage at the harshness of reality. But it was more subdued than when she had last seen him. Apparently, aging had softened him. Just on the right side of Kurt, she gave one nod. Even though it was nice to see him, she refused to get attached. Since he was Hokage, he would eventually die a fool's death. Sensei. For a while, the two gazed at one another in a struggle of wills that was customary during their better times. In response, Jiraiya said, "How is he?" "No improvement." With a sigh, the Sandaime appeared to grow older, if that were possible. "No change, although I have taken it upon myself to begin arranging things for when he awakens." 2.5 weeks ago, in the past, Nara Shikamaru was always a bright kid. Though he didn't particularly enjoy it, in fact, he preferred to do nothing at all. And overanalyzing situations was undoubtedly something he did enjoy. He was able to make connections and deductions at a rate that his teammates and fellows would probably never be able to match. What? If the same could be said of people, by that, what did the Sandaime mean? Shino had been right on the money. Although it wouldn't alter the scroll's overall characteristics, sealing something, especially a potent Kaiden ninjutsu, within it would improve its combat potential. Therefore, for people to experience the same thing, that would entail sealing things within individuals. Is the Sandaime expressing that? Is that even possible? To a certain degree, they were already aware, of course. In the past, they had been informed that skilled fuinjutsu masters could apply seals to skin, but only for basic purposes like storage. However, the professor, the Sandaime, the shinobi no Kami, would undoubtedly be aware that they had already discovered this. So, where were they now? What if jutsu isn't being sealed into a person? Shikamaru also suspected that the answer might have something to do with Uzumaki Naruto for some reason. Sakura Haruno had always been intelligent. She was smart, though perhaps not as smart as Sasuke-kun, Shino, or Shikamaru. Thus, she comprehended the Hokage's words. Closing off something inside people. Securing something inside. Suddenly, flashbacks to the event at the bridge appeared. Her teammate was radiating that awful chakra, and his coils were constantly expanding, as if his chakra were constantly changing. Is that possible for a seal? Has someone sealed Naruto with something? And she thought about that. When did the sealing take place, if it did? Why, did the way everyone treated him play a role in that? Her father had been. But her mother had been a little uninterested in Naruto. Well, more like not friendly than hostile. Sakura had witnessed Naruto being mistreated by others in the village, in addition to her own parents. Sakura had witnessed moments when he was genuinely, profoundly depressed, even though he always appeared to be happy. She had forgotten, or rather, she had let herself forget, that Naruto had gone through a lot as a child. She felt an unfathomable guilt that twined around the imagined face of her unconscious teammate. She would not wish the way people treated Naruto on anyone, least of all someone as consistently happy as Naruto, even though he did have his moments of foolishness and his constant harassment was annoying. Sakura had sensed the gap Naruto's absence had created in her team even in the nearly week since the mission to Nami no Kuni, Land of Waves. It felt like a limb was missing. It had felt so very, very strange to be missing a limb. Sakura was reminded of the incident on the bridge once more, as it had been doing lately. The horrifying sight of her teammates' slouched, bleeding bodies. No, not anymore. Kakashi Sensei has been teaching us our basic techniques, physical strength, and chakra control. I will not let Naruto down. I promise not to let them down again. Encouraged by her renewed motivation, Sakura gave herself a single nod, but in the meantime, she had some questions. Sakura asked, oblivious to Shikamaru's head turning to face her, as this related to that weird chakra Naruto had on the bridge. Hokage-sama? One of them would figure it out. Hiruzen knew. The fact that Naruto was a Jinchuriki was already so poorly concealed. The fact that they hadn't realized it long ago was something of a miracle. He was surprised that the Haruno girl would provide the young Nara with the last piece of the puzzle. If those two could learn to cooperate, they might end up becoming a formidable team. Oh, but isn't that what this is meant to accomplish? The new generation is this one. They need to be prepared for the responsibilities that will be placed on them. With his intense eyes darting between Hiruzen and the young Pinkette, the Nara heir asked, "Chakra? Naruto has a weird variant of chakra?" Sarutobi gave a nod. He detested the phrase, Shikamaru-kun, Sakura-chan. Naruto-kun is the village's Jinchuriki. To refer to an unwilling victim with such a ridiculous title as the power of human sacrifice seemed completely unfair. At least Kushina had not been overly bothered by Mito Sama's voluntarily sealing of the Kyuubi within herself. Tragic circumstances led to Naruto's birth as a baby. Sasuke was the one who initiated the conversation. Jinchuriki? What is that? Sarutobi heard frustration in the young heir's voice, which was as full of emotion as it could get. The boy seemed to want a direct response. Hiruzen was delighted to offer him one. A Jinchuriki is an individual who has had one of the 9 Biju sealed inside of them, replied the Hokage. He heard a chorus of gasps in response. While his former academy classmates were discovering something new about him, Naruto had another memory seen through Mito's eyes. When Mito reached their father's office in Hai no Kuni, they dashed through the hallways of the Uzumaki clan's fortress and burst in without even knocking. Her father yelled, "Mito!" in a severe and chastising manner, but Mito was unable to care. She looked expectantly between her father and the kunoichi in the room, panic and desperation churning in her gut. "Well?" she asked, mentally stifling the worst case scenarios because, no, it was impossible. What news? Uzumaki Hoshihiro would not die so easily. With a sigh, Tadashi looked sorrowfully at his oldest daughter. But the first to answer was the scout. "It appears that the valley has collapsed in on itself. We only managed to spend a few moments there before the Uchiha and Hyuga swarmed the area. It turned into a battlefield quickly, and judging by the multiple Uzumaki and Senju bodies there already, there may not even be anything left to save," the kunoichi said with a sad face, bowing to the present-day clan heiress. "By your leave, Tadashi." "Sama." The woman left when the Uzumaki man nodded. Mito felt numb. There was no way. One of the strongest shinobi in the elemental nations, Uzumaki Hoshihiro was a national hero. A father who possessed the Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains, before transferring the elusive gene to his oldest son, who was unable to use it. There was no way he was dead. Her heart was suddenly filled with worry. She had never really gotten along with her father, who had always been more brutal than her grandfather. While Hoshihiro was hesitant to give her up to the Senju, Tadashi would gladly consent, grinning. As though he could read her thoughts, her father told her, the alliance is to go ahead, and she felt her heart sink. Time seemed to stop abruptly, and Naruto saw 2 different forms. Mito, he thought startledly as he looked at the first and then at the second, Kushina. "Huh? What is going on?" With a quiet voice, Choji questioned, "A Biju, Hokage. Sama, how is that possible?" Sarutobi let out a sigh. The Biju are masses of chakra, and thus cannot be killed. In the past, members of the Uzumaki clan used their powerful Fuinjutsu to seal the Biju into different mediums, to no avail. Inanimate objects could only hold them for a short amount of time, and lesser organisms either could not handle the strain of having Biju chakra tainting the body, or immediately fell to their primal instincts and ceded control to the beast. A theorist in the field, named Mito, eventually found herself in an incident where the Kyuubi could, and indeed needed to be sealed away for good. With no suitable alternative, Mito sealed the Biju within herself. Mito was, of course, known to the village as Senju Mito, the wife of the Shodai Hokage. In time, when Mito approached the end of her lifespan, a child was chosen to become the next host. It was Mito's actions that set the precedent for sealing Biju within people, which is now commonplace throughout the nations which have possession of one of the 9. The young Genin began to whisper softly, and Sarutobi gave them a brief break to gather their thoughts. However, the Nara of the group quickly broke it. Hiruzen nearly flinched as the boy whispered, "Cannot be killed." Before he could build it more gradually, he hadn't planned to let that much slip. A moment later, Shikamaru said with a look of disbelief, "Naruto is the host of the Kyuubi?" The Sandaime stepped in right away because the Genin's shocked, perplexed, and horrified faces did not reassure them. "The word, host, is only true to a certain degree, Shikamaru-kun. Naruto can be compared to the Fuinjutsu scroll from my example. He bears a seal, and contains a considerable power of a less forgiving nature than himself, but is no less human for it. He is simply a means of confining the Biju, but he can call upon its chakra and abilities at will, as long as he is trained to be capable of such, the Hokage said. He had to convince them of that right away. It wouldn't help if they believed Naruto was just a manifestation of the Kyuubi's will. To accurately portray the nature of the relationship between Biju and Jinchuriki, he demonstrated Kaiten, fire release, ninjutsu sealing. He went on to say, Jinchuriki are severely mistreated, letting genuine sorrow color his voice. Many go insane from the way they are treated. Naruto himself has been largely spared the physical abuse some of his counterparts have had to deal with, but has instead been the target of much scorn from the villagers. His pranks were his manner of reacting to this. Astonished, the Inuzuka gazed up at the Hokage. The Hokage laughed despite himself as the boy, who appeared ever so slightly disbelieving, asked, that's why he played his pranks. Some of the genin laughed out loud at the idea, and Kiba himself paled a little. To an extent, yes. However, part of it may have been inherited from the prank-like nature of his mother. I do remember her once having her teammate, Aburame Shibi, enlist the help of several hundred fleas and set them down on the Inuzuka compound like a plague. A demonic habanero had used her brainwashed sidekick to descend upon the Inuzuka compound and inflict pain on the Ninken. Using clan, according to an urban legend that had spread throughout the village. But Sarutobi's next thought made him a little more serious. Naruto was the subject of physical abuse in several incidences throughout his life, however. For the most part, he has repressed these memories, or aspects of them that he subconsciously deems to be overtly negative. Because of this repression, especially the extent of it, Naruto has not matured at a normal pace. The Hyuga girl asked sadly and quietly, why Naruto.kun? And the Sandaime exhaled deeply once more. This is becoming a habit. He felt no need to disclose that the Kyuubi attack was caused by Naruto's birth, but it was a minor fabrication. A great many reasons, Hinata-chan, not all of which I am at liberty to discuss with you. Primarily, it was because Naruto's mother was the host before him, and lost her life on the day of Naruto's birth. It was this event that triggered the Kyuubi attack. No one would benefit from it. Furthermore, a Biju can only be sealed within a young child, or a descendant of a clan with a particular affinity for that Biju, the latter of which is, in and of itself, uncommon. Only the developing chakra coils of a child can hope to adapt to and hold the strength of a Biju. Mito's case was unique, both in that she possessed an incredible life force, and she managed to use a theoretical Iryo ninjutsu to accelerate her healing factor, at a cost of significantly shortening her lifespan. I am told that, by the time the damage was undone to Mito-sama's body, she had aged over a decade. Shikamaru frowned and hummed in contemplation. The Sandaime nodded in response to the question, so, Naruto had an affinity for the Kyuubi, since his mother was its host before him? Sakura frowned and interrupted, Hokage. Sama, did you say Uzumaki clan? Sandaime's eyes blinked. He believed they had overlooked that. Sasuke was unsure of his exact thoughts. A Biju was hosted by Naruto. A Biju, to be able to access all that power. He gave himself a little shake. Not much change. He was a blood relative of Naruto. Sasuke would be well advised to keep in mind that they were related. He had been there for hours and hours. He searched through the documents of the Uchiha clan, but he was still unable to identify Naruto's family. Why hadn't the Uchiha taken Naruto in? After all, he was an orphan. Why didn't his family adopt him? He was furious in another part of his mind. He thought back to Naruto's treatment, how he had been hurt. He now understood why. It was a situation completely out of his control. It would be comparable to Sasuke being harassed and jeered in public just for surviving the Uchiha massacre. It was needlessly cruel and completely nonsensical. It had the sound of something that man would do it. Sasuke gave a low, nearly undetectable growl. Even worse, they had separated Sasuke from his family, the last of his kindred. Ignorant of the closeness of their suffering, they had deliberately kept two lonely orphans apart. Dare they? Did you say Uzumaki clan? Sasuke blinked. What? That. Actually, it made a lot of sense. It made sense that Naruto would never have been listed in the clan's population registers if he was also descended from another clan. Additionally, it implied that his ancestor had probably been disowned, which meant that they would also only be mentioned in passing on the population register. Sasuke, however, also had a foot in the door because there was a list of exiled clan members going back a century. It was a rather empty list for the most part, but there were two notable exceptions. Sasuke's own great-aunt Uchiha Yusu, who was disowned after his death, and Uchiha Madara himself, among a few others. Itak. That man's name, inscribed in the younger's own blood, was something Sasuke had taken great pride in adding to the list. A traitor's destiny, sealed and sworn in Avenger blood. However, it's never enough. It would not be sufficient, even if his head were used to adorn Sasuke's house. However, Sasuke was getting distracted. The Sandaime answered. The Uzumaki were a clan of powerful shinobi. They were specialists in Fuinjutsu. You would know them as the founders of the Roku no Hagakoku, Protectorate of the Six, and Uzushiogakure no Sato, the village hidden in the whirling tides. Sakura let out a gasp, and Sasuke had never seen her so happy as she did at that precise moment. Not even after a spar earlier that week when he had extended his hand to help her up. They were both taken aback by that. But this time, she had that sparkle in her eyes that shouted of the wonder of learning something new. But he could understand her surprise, and a few of the other genin appeared to be as well. Uzushiogakure, Konoha's sister village, was formed by the alliance of 6 shinobi clans known as the Roku no Hagakoku. During the academy, not much was taught about Uzushio, other than the fact that the alliance had shattered spectacularly and that one of the clans, a piece of the Hazuka, had rejoined their kindred in Mizu no Kuni during the Second Shinobi World War's opening battle. Only the Kohaku had maintained their alliance with Konoha following the fall of Uzushio, and many Roku no Hagakoku had defected following the battle. With a smile, the Sandaime went on. The Uzumaki were a special clan. They possessed incredible forces of life, and a chakra and physical prowess unparalleled. Technically, the Uzumaki chakra and genes are a Kekkei Genkei of their own, and they tend to overwhelm the genes from other clans as time goes on, leaving only the Uzumaki-based traits. Both Naruto's mother and Senju Mito were originally Kunoichi of the Uzumaki clan. And now, this man seemed to be getting older, and he was Sai. Now, Naruto is the last of his clan. Much like you, Sasuke.kun. Sasuke felt shock pierce his bones with its icy fingers. To be honest, he wasn't even certain that he was still alive. Naruto is similar to me, his clan's final member. He is aware of the same hardships and suffering? He would not, however. Long ago, Uzushio had fallen. The final Uzumaki had always been Naruto. Before that thought could even begin, Sasuke put an end to it. Still. Thus, Naruto was closely related to the Uchiha. He wouldn't have the Sharingan otherwise. Sasuke made the decision to return home and examine the documents to determine the exact degree of scrutiny. Sarutobi surveyed the genin surrounding him, gauging their responses. Shino Aburame. As cool, collected, and calm as ever. Definitely one of the ones Sarutobi should be on the lookout for. Kiba Inuzuka. Astonished, repulsed, frightened, and perhaps a bit envious. It wasn't the worst response, but it wasn't the best either. Hinata Hyuga. Astonished, silent, and apparently uncertain. Not good at all. He had actually expected a lot more from the girl. 1. Shoji Akamichi. Shocked, horrified, a little scared, and a little hungry. Again, not the best, but certainly not the worst, and somewhat expected. Shikamaru Nara. Astonished, reflective, and slightly repulsed. It was probably as close to a landslide vote for Naruto as he would ever get. Ino Yamanaka. Horrified, enraged, and repulsed. An ideal response. Some of the gambles appeared to have paid off. Sakura Haruno. Shocked, horrified, and a little afraid, which was, in some ways, healthy. But all in all, a positive response. The Sandaime were hopeful about the outcome because she wasn't baying for blood like her father had once done. Among this group, she had been one of his biggest worries. Sasuke Uchiha. Cool, collected, and calm. To some, he was the epitome of indifference, but to Akage's trained eye, he was nothing. He was fearless and resolute. In that case, Hiruzen could only hope for the best. He exhaled a sigh of comfort. Well, one final task to complete, too. Before continuing, he made sure they were all listening. U9 rookie genin are the future of Konohagakure no Sato, he said. He paused to consider his choice of words, seeing Sasuke's face wipe itself completely emotionless. You are the next generation, the clan heirs and heiresses, the relatives of Konoha's elite. The influential and the ones with the greatest potential. It is up to you, now, to lay claim to the torch that keeps the will of fire burning. To work in tandem to defend your homes and families against those who would seek to take them from you, he said. Keep in mind that one day you will need to rely on those by your side to look out for you, just as they must entrust their weaknesses to you for protection. It is your relationships with those by your side that will carry you through the darkness that shinobi life will hold for you and onto better pastures. I'll let everyone go home for the day. However, Hiruzen thought it wise to alert them to one particular. Everything you have heard today is of S-rank secrecy. As a result, I will have to have you all summarily executed in secret if any of you try to disseminate the information that was given to you today, he said, gazing intently at the gathered children. Several gulped as a silent lull fell upon the genin, but judging by the glint in their eyes, they understood. He said simply, "You may leave," and they nodded before leaving thoughtfully. "Today, Sensei, are you certain this is a good idea?" When the elderly Kage was done, Tsunade asked, "Can you trust these children with such vital intelligence? With the secrets of Naruto? I don't understand how that story is yours to tell." She finally realized she had gone too far and calmed down. He fixed his pupil with a piercing gaze, gazing daggers into her skull, as a wave of rage swept over the boundaries of the Fire Shadow's control. You would question the decisions of the Hokage? Tsunade, do you mind if I remind you that you are a shinobi in retirement? Don't misjudge your position. You have no control over anything here. Namakuji. Slug. Princess, you will not be forgiven for leaving Konoha in her hour of need here. He realized with an inward flinch that he had gone too far, as if the resentment in his heart had been allowed to run amok today. A murderous scowl formed on Tsunade's face as her face turned an ugly shade of furious red. Would you dare say that I left this miserable place? After all, I've been robbed? This cursed village was created and is protected by the blood of my family, Sarutobi. Sensei, I will not act as though I have pardoned it for its sins. The floor tiles beneath her cracked as her foot slid slightly, and her last words were more derisive than anything else, her rage destroying her poise. For once, Jiraiya intervened with a long, awaited query, acting as a mediator. How did the go? Ikenban, Honored Opinion Watch, take this. A little sliver of fear settled in the Sandame's heart as he took his time explaining himself. This will not end well, Hiruzen said, finishing his recitation of the go. Ikenban meeting's events, when he felt a sudden surge of murderous intent. His desk broke under the force of Tsunade's fist a moment later. What did you agree to? Sarutobi started to perspire a little as Jiraiya whimpered and slowly moved away from his former teammate. She gritted out, she said, her pure rage radiating off the kunoichi in waves. I accepted Nara Shikaku's proposal to establish a cap on the number of children that Naruto and Sasuke, the Uchiha heir, could have during their lifetimes. Sarutobi didn't quite understand why his student was so upset about this, but surely that wasn't too much to ask of Naruto. The village cannot afford for the Sharingan to die off, and the Uzumaki clan's chakra is too great a potential asset for us to ignore, especially the Kongo Fusa, adamantine sealing chains. Why? She glared at her old teacher and growled, why Naruto? Has he not endured enough pain? It's not as simple as that, sighed Sarutobi. Only Sasuke and Naruto remain of the Uchiha and Uzumaki clans, Tsunade, who are both dying. The Go. Ikenban are too skilled at internal politics for me to shield Naruto from them. Why not Naruto, if you could protect Tsunade and Kushina from this Kree thing? After all, the Senju and Uzumaki were also dying clans at the time. Jiraiya actually asked the question, scowling at his sensei with annoyance and disappointment. Sandame's eyes blinked. How come he couldn't? Why hadn't he? What on earth? Why? Why did I allow that? He thought bewilderedly, going over the conversation with the Go. Ikenban in his mind. He had entered the chamber with the sole intention of taking command, but for some reason he had changed his mind and let others run the meeting instead, leaving him largely voiceless the entire time. Why had he permitted the Go? Ikenban to objectify Minato and Kushina in this way when he had promised them that he would protect Naruto and Itachi, that he would protect Sasuke. He was unable to understand why he had changed his internal policy approach in such a way. This needs more research. The only explanation I can think of is that I was put under the control of some kind of jutsu, and it was a very strong one, but the only explanation that I can think of that has such an effect. No, that can't be it. It must be something else. I don't understand. Indignantly, Tsunade screamed, you don't know? What do you mean? Does my godson receive so little care and consideration that you can't even recall limiting his existence? You smiled as you signed away his rights, and you dare say you have no idea why? Does Konoha's destiny really depend on the Hokage's whims? Her tone was a mix of anger and disgust, with a hint of mockery thrown in. However, her tongue had also betrayed her, as he could hear a faint but noticeable note of concern in her tone. Of course, it could be neither, but Sarutobi had his hopes, and they were all that kept him going these days. She cares more for Konoha than she lets on, perhaps. Or, perhaps, part of her has realized, during her absence, the futility of blaming the village for the fates of her loved ones. The Hokage instinctively reached down to grab his teacup, only to discover it broken on the floor among the remnants of his desk. Coughing lightly to correct his mistake, he continued studiously ignoring the angry looks of Jiraiya and Tsunade, mercilessly burying the anger that tried to boil over again. A shouting match would not help in this situation. I entered the room with more drive, intending to achieve the best result for Naruto and take control of the meeting. However, a change occurred that made me more flexible and receptive to ideas. I ultimately came up with what might have been the best outcome for the village, but not for Naruto or Sasuke-kun. It was more than that, almost as if he wanted to hand over control of the meeting to others. Why would that be? And now that he thought about it, the same thing had happened before, too. Having an intention for the meeting, and then losing any semblance of control over it. Do you believe this was related to the Go Ikenban? Watching his sensei intently, Jiraiya asked, like they did the release of Naruto's status as Jinchuriki. Tsunade tensed up a little. What is this? Glaring between them, she said, you gave the Go Ikenban so much freedom? It was before I formally reclaimed my position as Sandaime, here as inside. The Go Ikenban learned about Naruto's status just as well as I did, and one of them somehow told others about it. He frowned and said, I gave the T&I department instructions to try to find the leak, but to no avail. You think Danzo is guilty? You think he had something to do with this? Jiraiya asked, ignoring the pain that hit Hiruzen's chest at the name's mention. That seems the most likely, Sarutobi said with a sigh and a nod. Despite my constant reprimands, he spent a large portion of the first few years following the Kyuubi attack trying to get support for taking Naruto under his wing. Since then, he has turned his attention to Sasuke, but I have done my best to thwart those attempts as well. How is what I truly want to know? Nevertheless, I will look into it. We have to take care of Naruto's health in the interim, he said, and escorted the two out of his office. After healing Naruto's mental damage as best she could, Tsunade was found alone with him in his hospital room about an hour later. Jiraiya was off helping Sarutobi investigate how anyone, especially Danzo, could be somewhat controlling the Go Ikenban and even the Sandaime, while Shizune was off getting ready for their village accommodations after the Kyuubi attack destroyed the Senju clan compound. After adjusting Naruto's body so that she could comfortably rest her godson's head in her lap, Tsunade sat in his hospital bed. Even though she had lost a lot of people and endured a lot of hardship in her life, she had always loved Shizune and Kushina more than anything else, almost as daughters. She had raised both of them in many ways, and she missed the times when Kushina would wander into her bed at night and weep over the loss of her family, and when Mito would stand in the doorframe and smile pitifully at her two granddaughters. She could have that again now. As she thought of Sarutobi and how little he had done for her godson, hot, burning rage still churned in her gut. However, Naruto was different. He had suffered in his own, unique way and recovered. He had survived, against the odds, in defiance of a village that was out to get him. Naruto started to stir in wakefulness as she sat there, blinking up at her, his eyes glazed over for a second, as if in a memory, then he widened them. Sutsu-chan. But in some ways, hearing it again was like salve to an old wound that she didn't even know still ached. He asked softly, and the slug Sanin's breath caught. No one had called her that since Mito died, and the thought of her old nickname still saddened her greatly. How about just Tsunade? Obasan, Aunt Tsunade, Naruto. Tsunade regained her composure a little and smirked down at the boy, though the effect was probably lessened by the slight sheen of tears burning in her eyes. In one smooth motion, Tsunade stood up from where she had been holding his head and looked down at him, even as the boy attempted to sit up. Gaki, you're not leaving that bed. You've spent more than 3 weeks in a coma. Tsunade took the Mahi Fuin, paralysis seal, Jiraiya had left behind and slapped it on Naruto's forehead, frowning down at him. You're just as bad a patient as your mother, you know? Clearly, that was not the right thing to say, because he paled considerably and struggled a little more. She used to have to be attacked by old Koyanagi in the middle of the road and taken away for her medical examinations. If not, she would disappear and not be seen for days. I wonder how he managed that when she became an S-rank kunoichi, Tsunade said, humming, as she stopped suddenly. The lungs were one of the few things spared by the Mahi Fuin, and the target's control over them, so the increased rate of breathing probably meant that he was listening. Despite this, Naruto, who had no control over his own body, just stared at Tsunade. I'm your godmother, but I'm not sure what memories you have or don't have. Then she suddenly remembered the words her Oka-chan had taught her to live by. If in doubt, speak from the heart. I want you to know, Naruto, that if I had known that you survived that night, I would have never, ever left you here alone. She was unsure of what to say, wondering how other people did this. With the exception of you, I have lost every member of my family and have endured a great deal of suffering throughout my life. I had an odd relationship with your mother. It straddled the line between a mother-daughter bond and that of siblings. Naruto, I cherished your mother dearly. In her own unique ways, she was a stunning contradiction and my baby cousin. To her loved ones, she was as beautiful as a bright, sunny day, yet she could summon the fury of a storm at any time. He needed to hear this, and she needed to say it. I felt terrible when I discovered you were still alive, and that I had neglected my responsibilities as your godmother for so long, Tsunade continued, breathing heavily. And even if we parted on bad terms, she still saw fit to allow me to be your godmother. As if I weren't worthy of the honor, which I am in many respects. However, so much of who I am is enmeshed in my past. I can't go on because I've seen and experienced too much, but I would be honored if you would let me do my job right now to make up for my biggest shortcoming. She stammered, her feelings catching in her throat as she struggled to finish the sentence. However, she eventually managed to say, I wish you could stay with me. Together, Shizune and I can assist you in getting through this. Despite everything you're going through. I swear, she said, sitting beside him on the bed, taking his hands and holding them in her lap. I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. To nurture you, to take care of you. To be there, as I should have been all along, when you get home. I sincerely apologize if I have let you down so far. He did not answer, and although his eyes showed how shocked he was, he did not move. After a moment of frowning, she realized what was wrong and felt foolish. He sat there, working his jaw and blinking slowly, and even after he stopped, he was silent for a few moments, which Tsunade waited anxiously for before he spoke. He said, I'd like that, with a slight smile. His voice was quiet and a little lost, unlike Kushina's or even Mito's, which were both loud and boisterous and as warm as the summer sun, while Mito's was even and long. Suffering, but louder than most. Tsunade gave the difference some thought, but realized it was completely reasonable because he had experienced a lot in his brief life, and now he was reliving the memories, painful and otherwise, of Kushina and Mito. Tsunade gave the boy a smile. He was still her godson, and no one would take him away from her, but this was not the godson she had been told about or the way she had anticipated him to behave. Hi, Naruto. Do you know who I am? Jiraiya said gleefully, smiling down at the boy who was conscious. Arrow.og, perverted uncle, the blonde, flanked by Tsunade, Koyanagi, and Sarutobi, had looked up at his approach and just stared. Nothing more, nothing less. His eyes glazed over slightly for a moment, as if caught in a memory, which was probably the case, but then regained focus. He replied, grinning back at him. Koyanagi and Hiruzen laughed behind a slack-jawed Jiraiya. With a wolf-like smile, Tsunade said, I forgot how much I loved that nickname. Jiraiya let out a little cry of pain, but he bounced back fast as usual. You hurt me with your words, my godson. Furthermore, Gaki, I'm too old to be your uncle. He quickly suppressed the thought of how his unborn son with Aiko would have loved having a baby cousin, saying, not the time for that. Thank you. He disregarded the pain that coursed through his body at the thought of the only person to call him that. Naruto gave a nod of agreement before suddenly realizing, Arrow. Kyofu, perverted godfather, then. Yes, that was a lot better. Jiraiya complained a little, but his sensei ignored him as he went on to discuss more significant subjects. How are you feeling, Naruto-kun? The automatic, fine, response wasn't enough this time, so the boy seemed thoughtful for a moment, taking his time with the question, which they all appreciated. Finally, he spoke, in a softer voice than he usually used, almost hesitantly. My head hurts, Saru.air. I feel really confused and I keep getting little snippets of memories, he said, seemingly oblivious to the snort of laughter coming from Tsunade and Jiraiya. Nor are they exclusively Mito, Obe's and Ka-chan's. The Sandame scowled. Naruto, what else is there? Well, occasionally I go back to some of my earlier recollections. However, I sense. Not like me. Similar to the time Taka.ni rescued me from that insane Chunin. The boy paled a little and whispered, more hatred, in horror. But I felt more pain, and more anger, and sometimes, especially after what Naruto had been through, hatred was a natural reaction. Jiraiya was terrified by the way he made it seem as though he had never hated anyone before. Naturally, Jiraiya was as aware of the situation as Sarutobi and Koyanagi were, and Yamanaka Inoichi had previously told them about a split personality in Naruto's subconscious that was the result of suppressed memories and emotions and that appeared to be resurfacing, implying that the other personality was either dead or dying. However, this presented a whole new set of problems, as too much negative emotion toward Konoha would turn his godson against the village. He looked into the Sandame's eyes, and they all nodded in agreement, and all they could do was hope that enough positive memories would surface to counteract the negative, and try to build new relationships for him. Naruto, is there anything else? Jiraiya looked at the boy anxiously and inquired, not really sure if he wanted to know if there was more to it. He scolded himself in his head, saying, "No, stop that. Those kinds of thoughts are why Naruto has spent this long alone. Toughen up, you old shit." The blonde frowned and said, "No, not that I recall, Arrow." Kyofu and Jiraiya nearly exhaled in relief. "I'm curious how you knew that Mito was your great-grandmother, Naruto-kun," Koyanagi said, pointing to the blonde once more as she shifted uneasily. He acknowledged, "I had a conversation with both of them, remembering the exchange. 3 weeks ago." "What? What's happening?" Kushina cried out, staring around her in disbelief as she recalled her last memory of being impaled. "Naruto!" She yelled abruptly, looking all around for her baby son, and she instantly drew up short. There were 3 figures in the room, one of whom was pale, red-haired, and dark-eyed, wearing a complex formal kimono tied with a green sash, with her hair in 2 buns held together by pins, both of which had ceiling tags hanging from them. She wore a golden headpiece on top of her head, dark red lipstick, a purple diamond on her forehead, and a pair of white geta. The room was bright and open, with no shadows in sight, and it seemed to go on forever. Kushina herself wore a dark green flak jacket, a simple black short-sleeved shirt underneath it, and black pants that reached her calves, with bandages and a kunai pouch wrapped around the lower thigh of the right leg. Her feet were black shinobi sandals, and a white mask with a crab motif was worn on her waist. Her long red hair was pulled up in a ponytail, and she proudly wore a Konoha Hite.8 on her forehead, with 2 strands of hair framing each side of her pale face. But the most distinctive of his features were his tanned skin, short stature, and bewhiskered cheeks. The last was a short figure, a young boy with spiky blonde hair and startling blue eyes, wearing an orange jacket and pair of track pants, with a white collar and occasional lines of blue shinobi sandals. His right thigh was also tied with a kunai pouch and bandages, and his shoulders bore a gray version of the Uzumaki spiral. Kushina drew up short at once, looking anxiously at the youngest figure present, Naruto. Startled, he blinked at her. "Kushina?" She scowled when he asked. With a quiet smile, the oldest Uzumaki said, "She is your mother, Naruto-kun. We have been allowed a few moments to speak before the mindscape destabilizes." With tears in his eyes, Naruto turned to face the first woman and said, "K.Ka. Chan? So this is a mother's hug." Naruto thought, grinning slightly, "It's nice." The woman, who appeared somewhat surprised, turned to him in turn and nodded, smiling softly. Without giving it any conscious thought, they both threw themselves at each other, crying uncontrollably as they met in an embrace. With a slightly apologetic tone, Mito interrupted, "We have little time," turning to face Naruto and grinning as she said, "So you are my great-grandson." A huge breath was taken by both mother and son. "What?" With a faint wince, Mito used a delicate finger to clear an ear. "It seems that some things are genetic." "Well, whatever. Yes, I am your Oba-san, Naruto-kun." As the woman choked a little, she looked at Kushina and said, "My illegitimate son, Uzumaki Atsushi, was adopted, unknowingly, by his uncle, my brother Uzumaki Tsutomu." Are you actually the mother of Otto-san? With a look of surprise on her face, she inquired, "We're really so closely related to Tsutomu?" "Gigi? In any case, Mito. Obasama, how are we even here?" "Yes, both you and I are. Unfortunately, I'm afraid we don't have much time." She had a certain charisma and intelligence about her, displayed only to the extent that those who heard her speak would know it was prudent to follow. So they nodded, listening. "The Kyuubi has merged the remnants of chakra left behind after it was extracted from us, Kushina, with Naruto-kun's own chakra. This connection shall last only for a few moments, before Sarutobi blocks the memories slightly for a more peaceful transition." Her voice was calm and strong, and both Uzumaki felt themselves motivated to follow. She appeared to pause for a moment before continuing, saying, "He is also reliving memories from our perspectives, which means he will likely suffer deeply from the procedure. It is unclear whether it was aware of the possibility of this result coming to pass, but it has regardless. Even though I would have preferred it to be different, I'm sure that neither you nor I have the happiest memories, Kushina." Kushina turned hesitantly to face her son and nodded sadly in agreement, saying, "I hated Kirigakure and Kumogakure, Sochi, and the Yuki clan in particular." She knelt down to his level and said, "I'm sorry that you now have to bear my burden. If you need assistance sorting through my memories, you should speak with Mikoto, Jiraiya, Tsunade, or perhaps even Shibi." "I," scowled Naruto. "You know, I have no idea who any of those individuals are. I believe I recall Jiraiya and Tsunade's names from class, but I've never met a Shibi. He's an Aburame, isn't he? Similar to Shino. Sasuke is the final Uchiha, and Mikoto was one as well. His whole family was murdered." For a moment, Kushina appeared stunned, and then one tear trickled down her cheek. "I have suffered a lot throughout my life," Naruto-kun, Mito added. "It is unpleasant to hear of the fate of the Uchiha clan," she said, and Naruto could swear a trace of hopelessness had crept into her voice. "I would recommend Hiruzen or Tsunade if you need someone to talk to about your experiences in my memories. They probably spent the most time with me out of all the living." Mito's face abruptly changed into something he could not recognize. "Tell me, do you know who Sasuke's parents were?" She seemed to be rambling when she asked, but there was a hint of a desire for knowledge. What exactly, he couldn't tell, in her voice. "Well, you know, I'm not sure, but now that I think about it, I believe he was the clan head's son," he replied, frowning. She smiled, but she didn't say anything about the slight fire in her eyes. Kushina snapped her fingers in recognition. "That's Mikoto's son's name, in honor of the father of the Sandaime." "I had thought as such," Mito said, nodding in agreement. "Naruto-kun, you might discover that you can talk to him as well." "Why would I want to talk to that prick?" he snorted. He asked, only semi. Rhetorically. Suddenly, a fist collided with the top of his head, and Kushina, her expression dark and rather frightening, reprimanded him with a loud shout of, "No swearing, you know." "You know?" Naruto blinked at the woman while using one hand to shield his aching head. Mito chuckled, saying, "Naruto-kun, it's really much simpler to crack Uchiha's shell than you might imagine. All you need is perseverance and constant effort. I should be aware that Uchiha people love quickly and passionately, but they don't express it right away. You might discover that Sasuke-kun values you more than you realize." "You think he loves me?" Naruto gasped. "If he does, I'm positive it will be in a purely platonic sense. It would be rather incestuous otherwise," Mito replied with a smile, "and if not now, he might grow into it. As you change, you'll probably discover that his perception of you will also change. Even if he pretends not to, he will probably enjoy the company if he is actually the last of his kindred, apart from you, that is." "Aside from me, what do you mean, or incestuous, for that matter," he said, frowning. "That implies that we are blood relatives, doesn't it?" "I have already said too much," she said, disregarding his inquiries. Kushina, who was standing next to him, appeared perplexed by what the elder Uzumaki had said. "We have only moments. Kushina, it would be best if you said your piece now. Because of the gradual absorption of our memories, we will probably never be able to speak to him again." "Naruto-kun, I want you to know that the Kyuubi was sealed within you at no fault of your own," Kushina said, nodding at her grandmother, which wasn't such an odd idea, before bending down in front of her son and letting her form gradually fade into transparency. "I trust you to control it and harness its power, and so does Minato. And you will always be our son, no matter what. You know, nothing can take that away from you." Now that her body was nearly completely gone, her voice broke. "And never forget that we will always, always love you, Naruto." He smiled at her through tears and said, "Hi, Ka-chan," and she reflected his smile before fading away completely. "So my son's name is Minato? Where do I think I've heard that name before?" "Naruto-kun, Mito called, her form now becoming less solid like Kushina's. "Embrace the memories, don't be afraid of them. Keep in mind that your allies will always be there for you. All you have to do is repay them. I give you the responsibility of containing the Kyuubi. And never forget that you will always be loved by your family." And with those final words, she was gone too, leaving Naruto sobbing by himself as he was enmeshed in the memories once more. Today, they're both alive in that seal. Mito. Obasama told me what was going on, and something about the Uchiha clan. His announcement caused a slight intake of breath throughout the room. Naruto, Are you aware of Mito's lover? Jiraiya asked thoughtfully. They had been thinking about it for a while, and he responded, some guy called Madara. Chan, and the other people in the room choked. Jiraiya thought, trust Mito. Sama to call Uchiha Madara, Chan, and burst out laughing. Sarutobi would later tell him that it sounded somewhat hysterical. Sarutobi, Koyanagi, and Tsunade, on the other hand, were more likely to be hyperventilating. Do you know who Uchiha Madara is, Naruto? As the other three shinobi composed themselves and took in this new information, Tsunade asked incredulously, and the boy blinked and shook his head. Tsunade sighed and took her time, explaining to him the specifics of Uchiha Madara and his part in Konohagakure no Sato. Once Tsunade and Naruto had concluded their conversation, she said, you mean I'm related to one of the founders? It was question time again. Gaki, what types of memories have you already encountered? If they could identify a pattern, they could better assist him in adjusting to them, the Toad Sage asked, frowning. Well, primarily from Mito, Obe's and Chan's early years, and particularly from Mito, Oba. However, occasionally there are ones from when they were older, he said, his voice still soft in a way that bothered Sarutobi and Koyanagi, who had known a bright, lively child who was so different from this. When instructed, Naruto listed the notable memories he had encountered, and they all nodded, taking in the information. These included the memory of Madara and Mito in bed, Mito's encounter with Hoshihiro and Tadashi, Kushina's fight with Munashi Jinpachi, and numerous lessons from their early years that explained Naruto's somewhat improved vocabulary. Naruto, is there anything else? Tsunade inquired gravely, is there anything you haven't mentioned? No, Tsunade. Oba-san, said the younger blonde, shaking his head, that is all. The youngest person in the room nodded once more. Very well, just make sure to let us know if you start to get worse, Naruto-kun, the Hokage said, and Naruto nodded. And if you have any questions about a memory you see, feel free to bring them to me. We'll also need to organize a meeting with a member of the Yamanaka clan, Naruto-kun, Koyanagi said with a scowl. It would be prudent to assess the level of damage done to your psyche. Tsunade quickly picked up on the blonde's slow nod and yawn, saying, all right, no more business here. This child is going to sleep. You old fogies, get out of here. She gave Jiraiya a rough shove, but the Toad Sage accepted it. He caught Naruto's attention as he turned back to smile at the boy over Tsunade's shoulder and said, we'll be back in to see you soon, Gaki. Don't be concerned. Oh, and there are others who would like to come. But by the time he was done, the blonde had fallen asleep in the hospital bed and was unconscious. They had no idea how badly damaged the seal might be, and the damage to the boy's mind was probably also significant. It was also possible that the repressed personality bore more control, if it still existed. A day later, Inoichi was discovered sitting in front of the Jinchuriki, his face impassive. He had done this before, on several occasions during the child's youth, but this might be the most dangerous yet. Inoichi felt the Uzumaki enter his mindscape and dragged the Yamanaka clan head along with him as he placed his right hand on the abdomen just above the seal and his left hand spread out on the host's forehead. Inoichi's first thought was, it was different. The sewer had vanished, and in its place was a wasteland. There were craters all over the place, with fierce flames smoldering in a few of them every few meters, untouched by the continuous rain from a thunderstorm overhead that obscured the moon. Faraway flashes of lightning struck the ground, and an odd red glow appeared to spread through the clouds, shortly after looking around the abandoned area, which was built in the hazy shape of a large valley tucked away among mountain peaks and littered with the remains of buildings. The Yamanaka realized why the place seemed vaguely familiar, and he shivered. Even as he did this, though, the earth beneath him shivered restlessly. It's Kirigakure. The mindscape is an annihilated Kirigakure, he thought, shivering once more as his companion looked appreciatively at the landscape. Inoichi flinched when a flash of lightning struck nearby, but the Uzumaki remained motionless. I wonder what the symbolism of the red clouds is, he said, looking up. A lock in the shape of a spiral sat at the front of the Kusari cage, with the foundations and ends of all separate Kongo Fusa linking back to it. Part of the paper that once had the word Fuin on it was burned away, and the lock itself looked slightly burned, which was what scared Inoichi more than anything else. Across from them, in a large spherical cage made of Kongo Fusa, sat the Kyubi, but the man's keen eyes soon noticed the numerous gaps in sections of the chains, through which tiny traces of chakra leaked. On either side of the cage, unencumbered by the scenery, sat two thrones, one of marble lined with gold and one of obsidian lined with ruby. Neither was occupied by any figures, and Inoichi found it difficult to concentrate on them. Once he looked away, he forgot all about them, and not voluntarily. Strangely, 3 ebony coffins sat in the center of a pool of water, right in front of the cage. The first and second coffins also seemed to be connected to the seal. They were tied to it by a separate ribbon of what might have been chakra, and the chakra link connected the heads of the coffins with the seal's lock. 2 more bonds, one from each of the second and third coffins, connected themselves to Naruto's seal. The Uzumaki leaned down to touch the coffins, but was stopped by a deep, dark, evil voice. The Kyuubi said, "You won't want to do that." Ninjin and Inoichi turned to stare at it in disbelief. The Yamanaka had come to believe that the Kyuubi was incapable of speech and other such things because every time he had previously entered the mindscape, it had either retreated into the shadow of the cage or simply stared at him without saying a word. "Fox. Why not? These shouldn't be here," the younger blonde said, raising an eyebrow in interest as he pointed to the odd structures. With slitted eyes the color of the sky above them, it glared at its host and growled, "Those are linked to your predecessors. I am unsure of what the first contains, but I have my suspicions," it said. "Oh, rounding on the Biju," the Jinchuriki replied, "want to share?" It quickly responded, "No," and Inoichi, who had finally recovered from his shock, changed his approach by asking a question that had been bothering him for years, since he had lost his father and sister to the Kyuubi 12 years earlier. "What caused you to attack that evening?" he asked, and could hardly suppress the bitter hatred that surfaced to the forefront of his mind. A deep, lingering loathing finally forced itself into the light, and Inoichi was glad to show it. "You killed hundreds of people. How could Konoha have earned this fate? You think yourself fit to demand an answer of me, mortal?" The Biju growled low. "Of the 9, am I the best? But the title of greatest of the 9 hasn't exactly benefited you, has it?" Softly and blithely, Naruto remarked, "You are still bound and isolated from the world that you would destroy without giving it a second thought. As you have to be." Naruto, in particular, started to perspire as a strong killing intent was layered at the two. "You have not changed, Ninjin," he said. "Proceed." Its voice was more like a growl than anything else, and its tone was one of blatant dismissal. "I shall speak to you no longer." "But," said Yamanaka, the elder. "Leave," it yelled and roared loudly enough to drive them out of the seal, oblivious to the ferocious smile that fell across its face or the tiny crack that appeared across one of the Kongo Fusa that held the Biju. Inoichi focused on the Jinchuriki as they gasped their way back to the waking world. "You spoke the beast as if you knew it," Inoichi said, scowling at the boy, his stomach churning with suspicious doubt. "How?" The younger blonde sighed. "I can say with certainty that I understand the Biju, and especially the Kyuubi, because I've seen enough memories from the perspectives of my mother and great-grandmother. Its only desires are death and violence. The world shouldn't have to face its power once more." He answered softly, "I will not permit it," with a passion that surprised the older blonde. After giving the boy a long look, the Yamanaka nodded and said, "I will discuss this with the Hokage." When the Uzumaki started to move, he added, "Alone?" The boy nodded, and the older blonde walked out of the room to talk to the Hokage. He was discovered in the Shinobi no Kami office 10 minutes later. "Inoichi, how severe is the damage?" Sarutobi's face darkened as Inoichi answered the Sandame's question, huffing his breath before explaining, "And how would you interpret these different aspects?" When he finally asked, Inoichi scowled. "Since the mindscape is based on a war-ravaged Kirigakure, it suggests a deep-seated animosity toward Kiri, which is probably a holdover from Kushina Sama and, to some extent, Mito Sama. There were numerous craters and flaming pits on the land surrounding Kiri, which I believe are more indicative of a seriously damaged psyche than the actual destruction of the mental Kirigakure. The presence of fire in some areas suggests a high level of rage in general. It is perfectly reasonable in this case to interpret the Earth's tremors as an expression of discomfort and displacement." The younger man's frown suddenly became even more noticeable. "As for the red-tinted clouds, I cannot honestly be certain. Such a thing is unprecedented. But the thunderstorm is probably a sign of both conflict and impatience, as a storm is generally anything but patient. Neither are good signs." He shivered and said, "And I believe we both understand what the harm caused by the Kongo Fusa Cage's manifestation means, Hokage Sama. And how would this mindscape compare to somebody else of a similar situation?" The Hokage hummed, nodding. He asked. Inoichi shuddered once more. "The problem is that it doesn't. As you are aware, the majority of mindscapes are calm and serene, even when the subject is an antagonistic, warlike person. This is due to the fact that the mind is designed to accommodate such things and is, in many respects, a place of refuge from suffering. Another fairly common theme is order. The chaos itself is a sign of a chaotic mind, and such signs of death and destruction are typically indicative of a profound emotional imbalance. Hokage. Sama. I am inclined to propose that Uzumaki Naruto be removed from the active shinobi roster because there is nothing wholesome about his mental state. Hiruzen scowled but nodded in agreement, saying, I think it's wise for Naruto to train and get counseling in order to get over these memories, even though I appreciate your viewpoint on this, Inoichi. Neither Naruto nor his forebears were inclined to sit around in malignant silence, obediently. He continued, he will train inside the village, and once you deem him fit enough to undergo missions, he shall be trialed on some, he said, acknowledging the Yamanaka's hesitant nod. I am sure you know Naruto-kun's personality well enough to know that this would not work well. However, even at this point, Naruto must continue his therapy in order to overcome these memories, and I will assign you to this task. He will require assistance during this process because some of the memories he has shared with me are distressing. He has obviously lived the lives of 2 women, he said, appearing somewhat put off by the idea, and he will probably require assistance on that front as well. You are to collaborate with him as frequently as your schedules permit. After a brief pause, Inoichi nodded and said, by your word, Hokage. Sama. But he hadn't been fired yet. Inoichi. How about the other self? He frowned as he asked. The head of the Yamanaka clan shrugged. Really? I didn't see any signs of it. It won't last long if it's still there. But, Hokage. Sama, we have to exercise caution. He trailed off, certain that the renowned shinobi would have come to the same conclusion by now if the boy had suppressed more of the memories. Sarutobi grimly nodded and said, yes, we must, Inoichi. For forming new bonds to replace the biased old, you will need to count on him just as much as he must count on you, he said, and they believed him. 3 days had gone by when Naruto woke up, and the Sandaime had asked the Genin of Teams 7, 8, and 10 to arrive at Konoha's hospital simultaneously. They were not entirely sure how Naruto would react to their presence because, aside from Kiba and Choji, none of them got along well with the blonde Jinchuriki, and he might not find them interesting. Nevertheless, they prepared to face the situation head on because they all had something to say to their injured comrade. The Hokage and each of their sensei were waiting for them at the entrance. The elderly man bowed to the Hokage upon their arrival and grinned at the gathered Genin. Naruto-kun has been awake for 3 days now, and is thus capable of having visitors, he declared, and the Genin's eyes widened. The gathered children gave a nervous start, but then fell silent. They were shinobi, and they would handle it. One topic stayed on their minds, though, as they walked the corridors of Konoha's hospital, each sensei walking with their leader, leaving them at the door. Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto was still acclimatizing to the memories, whatever that meant, and his head hurt. He would admit that it had hurt for a while, and he was warned that it was unlikely to stop for a while either. But he did know, and that was the difficult part. Small, inconsequential things, like a word being said or a person or event being mentioned in passing, could trigger another memory. His vocabulary had improved significantly thus far, and his personality had changed significantly. The nights were frequently restless because his mind would frequently bring up the worst memories while he slept. At the moment, there were only minor, childish cruelties. Nothing particularly repulsive or disgusting, but he knew that things would get worse over time. After all, Mito and Kushina were shinobi. He still hadn't had many memories of Hiruzen and Mito, and now he had to deal with his former classmates. The Sandaime had told them, and that had been such a breach of his privacy that he was still feeling the effects of the blow. However, even as he was thinking about that, another thought came to him. Mito and Tobirama had shown Hiruzen, Homura, and Kaharu the Cage Bunshin Shadow Clone, a deadly ninjutsu technique that they had spent months developing, and the 3 had absorbed the information like sponges. His eyes were glassy, as though in a dream, and his face was expressionless when the rookies walked in. Blinking, Choji said, Naruto? He asked softly, trepidation lingering in both his form and voice. The blonde shook his head and turned his eyes to him. Are you okay? With a slow, thoughtful nod, Naruto said, about as good as I can be, certainly. His voice was softer than they could ever recall. We. The blonde's attention was drawn to Kiba by the absence of an insult in his name, or in place of it, for that matter. Heard you've been unwell, Naruto, Kiba said, hesitant in a way his kindred so rarely were. Brash, and Inuzuka maybe, but never unsure. With a small sigh, Naruto nodded once more and said, yes, my head hurts. I continue to become sidetracked during difficult times, but there he was again. A fleeting glimpse of a battle between the Hyuga and Uzumaki in which Mito became sidetracked playing in his mind before he mentally corrected himself. Yuto. Naruto. He blinked in mild bewilderment when he realized it was Ino calling his name, who never used it. He sighed and said, "Ah, sorry, Ino, I simply became engrossed in recalling something," he finally acknowledged. "To be honest, that's okay," she shouted, and Ino smiled at the boy, who didn't smile back. Her happiness soon gave way to sadness, and they sat in silence. "You speak differently," Shino observed, using the pause in conversation to his advantage. "You seem to have expanded your vocabulary a little bit and are more soft-spoken. Additionally, you are more reflective than you used to be. Why is that?" Blinking at him, Naruto said, "It's complex, and I am unable to talk about it." They actually did, since they were aware of the Kyuubi's status as a Jinchuriki. Let's just say that it's for a very good reason, and leave it at that. You know, S-rank secrecy and all that. The shouting was getting a little hard to handle, Shikamaru said, his lips twisted in the shadow of a smirk. "I actually prefer this." Sasuke gave a firm nod. "Well, I can definitely agree with that. I don't understand how you got promoted with all the yelling and yelling you were doing, Dobi." "You know, they had to," sneered Naruto. "I am a Jinchuriki and the last Uzumaki. Even if I hadn't graduated late, I'm pretty sure they would have placed me in some sort of super training program. The village requires its weapon." "Nah. Naruto-kun," Hinata said softly, her speech breaking with a stutter, and at his nod, she added, "How did you manage T.to hand deli so m? Much hatred?" They all sat down a little at his declaration. With horror, she inquired. He responded with a sigh, saying, "I'm not sure I handled it," Hinata, with a frown. "I think it would be better to say repressed." Only Shikamaru, Shino, and Sasuke saw Ino shiver a little as he said, "I ignored it and pushed it to a corner of my mind, leaving it there. Now, though, it's all rushing to the forefront. I'm recalling incidents that I don't recall clearly, and I feel different than before." His voice was so haunting and soft that they all had to confirm that it was indeed Naruto. "Naruto?" Sakura asked, surprised by the shift, and he remained silent, so they sat in silence for a while again. "Why?" To their surprise, Naruto asked abruptly, "Why have you handled this so well?" "We were told all about how you were treated," Shikamaru finally said after an awkward half-minute of silence, and a few days later, Hokage Sama reunited us to talk it out. They exchanged uncomfortable looks, and Naruto's heart sank a little. Maybe they hadn't. "We all came to the conclusion that you had suffered a great deal and that you were not the Kyuubi. And we hadn't really been of any assistance there." 3. Sakura added, "But, with a faint but noticeable smile, we realized that none of this was your fault." The other genin nodded around her. "You didn't ask to be attacked, to be ridiculed by the village, or even to have the Kyuubi sealed within you. So, Baka, get up. We wouldn't have come here and be talking to you like this if we thought you were that dumb old Bakagitsune, monster fox," Kiba cried, smiling, and if the smile was uncertain, almost hesitant, then no one felt the need to say it. "We have you stuck here. Can you forgive us?" "That's the main question, Naruto-san. You might wonder why. Since you are the one who has been wronged, here," Shino interrupted, "it is not our place to assume that our mistakes are so easily atoned." The other genin had fallen silent around him and were looking expectantly at Naruto. Taking his time, Naruto thought carefully about the question. Could he forgive them? What had they really done to him? Nothing more than the childish mistakes of children. No real injustice, of course, and no violent incidents like those of the insane Chunin or some of the bullying sensei in the academy. Sakura, who constantly beat him and degraded him, Ino, who occasionally did both, and infrequently the former. Sasuke, Kiba, and the others had just sat back and watched as the abuse took place. Was it really an excuse that they hadn't done anything to stop him? Could he really be around people like that? But then he had another thought, and he realized that they were victims, just like him, though not to the same extent or in the same manner. They had been duped by the false reality of youth and the illusion of justice, and they could not really be held responsible for having trusted their parents and their village about how its outcast was treated. Naruto came to a conclusion after observing each of their sincere expressions, even though in some cases it was well concealed. "All right. Sure," Naruto said, and although his smile wasn't as bright or cheery as he was known for, those rookies who were prone to such things still mirrored it, and the others nodded in agreement. It was a beginning.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.